Not Quite Right features discussions that are unfiltered and uncensored and may include themes that are inappropriate for younger listeners. Also, I swear a lot.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
Amanda, you know what's not quite right?
Oh dear.
The last episode we recorded.
Some might call it wrong. Just straight up wrong.
So, hell hath no furry like a woman's porn, which is a great title, by the way.
Thank
I want
you.
to give you credit for that one. It's a lot cooler in the studio today. I think it's about 10 degrees cooler. It's still not cool.
It's still not cool.
It's quite warm. There's no ice packs on our heads.
No, we're not
let's say
wearing.
that.
We're not wearing ice. Well, I have a little bit. No, I actually don't. I'm in trouble already.
Yeah. We started off on a weird foot.
Yeah.
Just before we hit the record button. So,
I'd just like to do a little count. So the innuendo jar has $17 as of the start.
that means 17 dirty jokes. And I think only like 7 or 8 of them made them into the episode. Like the others were too hot for radio.
Way too hot. So I'm going to have to pay up because I did make a terrible one on our social media. I mean, I've probably done more than one, but I'm just going to pay $1 now. So that's a nice start. Okay, so now there's $18.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll get to $17 again with the temperature the way it is. But you know what? Having said that, I do want to return to the subject of last episode, which is monster sex. And the wine we're drinking today, what is it, Amanda? You bought this wine. You spotted it in the shop and said, that's the one.
Mount Monster?
Mount Monster. Mount Monster Shiraz.
Don't mind if I do.
And you got 2 bottles.
I did.
We call it double hydration, I believe.
Double fisting. That's what you call it in America.
How much money have you got here?
That's,
Like, come on, dude. I'm going to go broke.
that's what you call it in America.
Is it double
When you've
fisting?
got 2 drinks. Is it American who said that?
Is it America or is it pornography?
It's not. Hang on. Let me look it up so I can be accurate. Double fisting origin.
So you're searching double fisting
Yeah.
right now.
Oh, this link's already been hit. It's purple. This link's purple. It can mean holding 2 alcoholic drinks at once or other things.
My only question is, at what frequency? So cheers.
Cheers.
I'll just say the Mount Monster goes down pretty easy.
Go on. Go on. Just put, that's what she said.
No. I think we need to have a rule like if you do an innuendo off the back of an innuendo,
Yeah.
then it doesn't count. Otherwise, we're just going to be like making it rain.
I'm happy to make it rain, but all right.
All right. So I want to revisit the topic of monster sex for a second because we put the call out on the last episode of like, I was a bit confused about the whole thing of monster sex and why it was so appealing. And I saw on Instagram, we actually had someone, Laura Amy, author, who provided a little bit of insight into why
A
that
lot
might
of
be.
insight, actually. I found that enlightening.
So Laura says, people's attraction to monster sex novels is a surprisingly complicated subject, isn't it? I think women like them for many different reasons. Sometimes it's a different version of bad boy and mafia romances with powerful, sometimes monstrous men who are only soft for the heroine. She's special. Sometimes it's a safe fantasy of possessive alpha sex, where we don't have to feel guilty about being problematic or worry about all the reasons why a fantasy would be bad and or terrifying in reality. Sometimes it's the need to fantasize of something far removed from one's own sex life. Sometimes it's just size kink. Yeah, lots to take in there.
Go on. No, but thanks, Laura. I think that was eye-opening for me because, you know, I hope I didn't make anyone feel shamed with my little vanilla, very ignorant kind of attitude, I guess. It's, you know, each to their own.
I guess, yeah, like we were struggling a little bit to say, like, what's the reason? But I think what Laura's saying is there's not one reason.
Yeah.
And it appeals to different people for different reasons. And your view of, like, it's entertaining is just
Yeah,
as
that's
valid
my reason.
as-
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think all of those opinions are valid. You know, in the world we live in these days, everything has a market kind of thing. So I Thanks for sharing, Laura.
And on the topic of the Not Quite Right prize for flash fiction, so reminder, entries are open till the 24th of August and they are flooding in, filling our inbox.
Go on.
We're going to run out. Now, we were talking to a listener on the weekend, and I won't call them out by saying who they are, but they asked, do I have to tone it down for the Not Quite Right prize for flash fiction? Like, do I have to tone down the sex to make
what's the level?
What is the level? And listen, there's no level. Go as hard as you want. And that's why we have the spice levels, demure, explicit, and intense. And you can go as intense as you want. And we would love for you to go like as hard as you feel comfortable with going. Like, you're putting your name against it or you're putting a pen name, as we've said in the past. We won't reveal your real name and we'll only reveal your pen name if that's what you want us to do. So don't feel like self-conscious that people will know that you've submitted that. We'll be, we're 100% behind keeping that information private.
I will say that, I've been reading some of the entries that have been coming through, and it's probably tamer than I would have expected and potentially tamer than it needs to be.
Yeah.
Like, again, there's a home for everything here. So I'm not saying don't give us your demure stories. But I do think like we've probably got a lot of people who, like you and me, have just thought about writing this stuff. Maybe it's an early venture, like been writing for a while or a long time, but only just starting to sort of dip their toes into this world. And I would encourage people to dip your toes enthusiastically, right? Sorry. So
I don't know where your mind went there.
It doesn't take much these days. So I just think like don't hold back. It is an erotic fiction competition. It is not a flash fiction competition. There's a different primary objective. There's a different form of entertainment that you are trying to provide, I suppose. And we have already mentioned how there's different ways like people will receive that. But at the same time, like there's one central theme here and we do have to keep that in mind, I think. So I would encourage people to go there, I guess, and to turn up the heat.
Yep.
And, if you want to win, I think you need to turn up the heat. I don't know.
I think that's the message, like don't hold back for our sake. Don't think that you need to like censor yourself. Just go hard.
Or go home. I feel like we have to take some responsibility here though, because I've been noticing that people have been turning up the heat online as well. And so Renanda Rich, who I follow on Twitter, was joining in on the 30 words, 30 days challenge, which is just on Twitter. Danielle Baldock has been putting out prompts each day in April. And the idea is you've got to write a story in exactly 30 words on Twitter using that prompt word. And Renanda's story yesterday, as at the time of recording, was a little spicy one. And
do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Mine tried to hump the new dog. Her handsome owner wasn't bothered. When we meet tonight, we won't be twirling dog poo bags. We might be thinking about doggy style though.
Ooh.
Very risque. And so her justification in the thread was, I think I've been listening to too many Not Quite Right podcasts. So that's nice that we've corrupted everyone's mind.
Yeah, and just a little insight into our Not Quite Right private group chat. We have a bit of a hashtag that we use now, which is hashtag FFRM or Flesh Fiction Ruined Me, because now we're just sort of out there in the world just seeing things through
a different lens.
Yeah, it's not rose-coloured glasses. I'm not sure what you'd call it exactly. I don't know if it's just regressing to this preteen state of finding everything hilarious.
It's kind of a problem.
It's getting to be a problem. So apologies to all of you who are also experiencing that problem. But I think Flesh Fiction has ruined us all.
Indeed. Or maybe we were already ruined.
Maybe.
That could be part of
It's a chicken or the egg situation. Yeah. And just before we move on, I guess I just wanted to issue a formal on-air apology to you for not appreciating you, for not appreciating your rec. I'm really sorry. And I knew at the time, and I did acknowledge at the time that it would grow on me, and it is growing on me.
That's good.
Talking like with Anchorman, going over all the quotes later makes it more fun. Hearing you giggle like a schoolgirl makes it more fun. And I really felt bad because I guess it was like you were the cat, right? And you were bringing me the dead rat. and I wasn't appreciating the gift.
I don't know if I love this analogy, but okay.
But well, let me just continue the analogy for a second. So you're the cat, you're bringing me this dead rat, you want me to love it, and you've worked hard to bring me this dead rat. But the problem is that it's full of maggots.
All over the floor.
The post office in Waynstone. So I do love the quotes, and it's with me now, and I'm sorry if I made you feel bad. I'm sorry if I was a Debbie Downer and got all serious with something that's actually really dumb and fun.
So you're talking about obviously the Garth Marenghi segment from the last episode, and that's all fine, and I like that you're honest about your opinions, but at the same time, it's also a show that is not to be taken seriously.
No, I know.
So it is what
given
it is.
how unserious everything else was last episode, I'm surprised I got all fired up. But anyway, I do apologise. Thank you for the rat, and I will continue to cherish it henceforth.
Wonderful.
And we also mentioned last episode that we were going to see Linda Atkins perform locally to do a reading of a true story of hers. Yep. And we did do that. We've been. It's called Brave Words was the event, and it was such a good time. And I just have to commend Linda. She did a wonderful job reading her story. It was very moving.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because it's not something I do often, is sit and listen to someone of course people are telling you stories from their life all the time, but to hear this sort of very well constructed and written story about her life spoken out loud by her in front of a group of people who are all just there to listen was quite an interesting experience.
Yeah. We've been talking about going to Brave Words for quite some time, and this was a great opportunity. And I thought Linda's story was a standout. It was very heartfelt. It was very moving, as you said. It was also very relatable. I mean, we've all been through that awkward time in our lives. So yeah, it was great to hear that, and it was great to hear the other writers and storytellers up there on the stage. Yeah, and it's very much like that format. That storytelling format is very much like Story Club at Words on the Waves, which we see every year. And we'll be back again this year at Words on the Waves to do some interviews in beginning of June. I think it's a couple of months away.
Yeah, so that's our local Writers' Festival, Central Coast Writers' Festival. Got some great authors coming to give talks, and
one of them is you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I'm listed up on the speakers page or something
you're
like
listed
that.
first.
Yeah, I'm going to be delivering a workshop there. So I delivered a workshop not too long ago at Tuggerah Library, which was a Start Writing Flash Fiction workshop, just trying to get a few more members of the cult. And hello to any of you who might be listening. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and I hope you stick with us. Yeah. And maybe, we've got a few who will be entering the comp this round, so I hope you enjoy. And hoping again to, at Words on the Waves, maybe lure a few more fish into our little pond.
So what's the subject of your talk?
Yeah, so it's called Start Writing Flash Fiction. So it's mainly geared towards people who I guess are curious about it. I know for myself, when I started out writing flash fiction, it's I know what a book is. But, I've heard this thing, flash fiction, what is it? And, some people dive in, but I'm the kind of person who likes to understand what I'm doing. And so I guess I wanted to share that knowledge, what is it exactly? And just kind of invite people in. It's not rocket science, right? It's just a very short story. And I guess inviting people to reconnect with their creativity, either something that they haven't done for a while or just trying to find time for it in their lives. I think flash fiction is really good for all of that stuff. So my goal, I guess, is just to kind of spread the word a bit, make people feel comfortable to start writing and go down this journey like we've been on for the past several years now.
That sounds good. I'm very proud of you for doing that.
Thank you.
It's exciting. So if any of our listeners are in the area, the Central Coast of New South Wales, just go to the Words on the Waves website and you can sign up for that.
Yeah, I'd love to see you there. I mean, I guess most of our listeners have probably already got a little bit of an insight into what flash fiction is exactly, but we do go into some of the crafty stuff as well, and of course encourage people to start writing flash fiction during the workshop. So that's good fun too. In fact, Alexandria Balani, who was our second place holder in the January comp this year, she came along, which was lovely. It's nice to have a friendly face there. Yeah. But I'm also not only looking forward to the workshop, which will be Awesome. I love it. I do. I get such a buzz off it. It's so nice being in a room in the meat space, you might say, with real people, but also just meeting the authors as we do and getting to interview some of these authors has been a thrill, the past couple of years that we've been doing this. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it and can't wait. And if you do see us there, please come up and say hi.
Yeah, for sure. And so before we move on to the main topic of the conversation for this episode, which will be Amanda's recommendation, Save the Cat, as of the time of recording this episode, the last episode to go live was our fourth Daredevil from the January round, which was Say the Words by S.A. Braden. And we had an email from an anonymous source who let us know that the story very closely resembles one that is found in an anime called Frieren Beyond Journey's End.
Yeah, and not only the email, but someone else brought it up online on social media as well, highlighted that comparison, which is interesting because neither you or I watch anime, so it was completely new to us.
And so I went and looked that up and watched that episode. And yes, there is a part of that episode that does resemble the story that S.A. Braden submitted as a Daredevil in the last round. So yeah, we wanted to, I guess, talk about that. And we invited S.A. Braden to leave us a message with his thoughts about the topic. And we'll play that for you now.
Hey, Ed and Amanda, it's S.A. Braden from California. Thank you for your guys' critique of Say the Words. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Say the Words was inspired by Frieren Beyond Journey's End. There's this particular scene in there where there's, shape-shifting demons that present as a child. And so that's kind of the idea I wanted to play with, is like that whole emotion versus responsibility, and then inaction kind of equals culpability. And in this case, it was Amethyst in action because she knows what's going to happen from the sight, but chooses not to do anything, and then, wonders if Egret is judging himself, but she's not judging herself for her responsibility in what happens in the climax. I think the idea of inspiration or media that inspires you is an interesting topic. I think it's important to, pay homage to things that inspire you. Cormac McCarthy famously recreated a scene in Paradise Lost, John Milton's Paradise Lost, in what I consider his magnum opus, Blood Meridian. So, writers don't write in a vacuum, and we definitely want to give homage to media that we love. So that was my idea. Thank you.
And S.A. Braden said something similar on social media on Blue Sky as well when this was kind of talked about in the thread, is that, yes, this was an inspiration for the story. And like in this case, the plot of this short story, obviously flash fiction, we're not talking about a huge sweeping plot. It's not a movie length thing. And I think in the anime it was only about 3 minutes worth of screen time. So it was very short, but it did closely resemble it.
Yeah, well, I think the temptation in this situation is to sort of see two things that are very similar and to just say, oh, that copied that or that ripped that off or it stole the idea. And what I guess I've learned in the time of I've been, working on this kids novel that I've been working on is there's no such thing as an original idea, first of all. And in the years where my novel's not getting published, the amount of times I've walked into a bookshop and seen some version of my idea quote unquote stolen and put on a shelf. Like, I'd be rich if I had $1 for every time I saw these books get there first. And I mean, that's one thing, I guess, where we're just sort of all human beings sort of being lit up by the same ideas. But in this case, like it is, S.A. Braden said himself that he was paying homage to this particular piece of anime. And, I've done a similar thing in my novel. I was very much paying homage to The Goonies. I love The Goonies. I used it heavily for inspiration. There are elements of the plot that mirror things that happened in The Goonies, but I wouldn't call that stealing the idea. And I wouldn't call what S.A. Braden has done stealing the idea either. It's like, look, I've seen this piece of art. It's moved me. I love it. Something about it has touched me. And now I want to share what I've taken from that with the world. I want to give it my own twist. I want to add to it, or that's part of me now. Yeah. And that's part of the message that I want to put out there. And especially, if you're in my position and wanting to emulate something that you love so much and try and create art, that's kind of up there whilst knowing that you can't. It's a weird mix of things, I guess. But I guess I have mixed emotions about it. But I very much believe that like imitation is its own form of artistic expression when you take something and give it your own flavour, your own colour. Like you're part of that conversation now.
Yeah.
It's not like someone puts that out and then that's it. You know, it becomes part of the cultural conversation.
Yeah, and look, I think that's the most important part of it is that you do take that idea that you love or that media that you love and give it your own twist, add something meaningful to it. You know, even if you're just recontextualizing it or whatever the case may be, that's one way of doing it. Another way is like using the same characters and settings directly and, you know, writing within that world in a kind of fan fiction type way. So there's multiple ways you can do it. And I don't really have a problem with any of those. So I guess it's a fine line. And I think what's actually quite important is that you're clear in what you're doing as well. So like if you're writing a fan fiction, it should be clear that you're writing a fan fiction, right? You know, not that you're just rewriting a story that you've seen somewhere else and you're using the same characters and you're just writing that same story. So I think, you know, it's important that people understand what you're doing, that it is referencing the source material and you are adding your own twist to it.
Yeah, I guess in a competition setting, like where it becomes difficult is where it feels like someone is passing their work off as, right? And so in a competition setting where there isn't that context of this is something I love or this is something I'm riffing off, then I guess, you know, your competitors might challenge that.
Yeah.
And they might say, hang on, that wasn't your idea.
Yeah.
And what if I just went and took an idea that I've seen and then now I've written my story about it? And, you know, I think that's a valid thing to talk about at least.
Yeah.
That's a valid issue to raise. But at the same time, I guess I would shy away from like calling it plagiarism, for example. I don't think it is. But I guess you've got to walk that line for yourself. Like, what are you comfortable doing? If someone came up to you and said, hang on, I've seen that thing somewhere before, what would be your response?
Yeah. Look, I do think that S.A. Braden included some elements that weren't in that story. Like there was the whole concept of the site and the words. And so there were other things being played with there. And I think, you know, in the message that we just heard, there was the idea of what if it was a premonition and one character knew what was going to happen. And then there was an idea of wrestling with that knowledge. So I think there was something added to it in that case. So yeah, like I would just say it's something, like you said, as a writer, something that you find your own line with. And I would say generally be careful because we do want to receive original stories and like, you know, what is original and there's no such thing as an original story. But at the same time, you need to have at least your own twist to it.
Yeah, I think probably what I would suggest to people first and foremost is be yourself. If you're telling your own truth, trying to emulate something, which I do too, that's something. That's sharing your love of that thing. But you've got to speak your own truth about that because that's what we want ultimately.
Yeah.
We want a piece of you.
Yes, exactly. So we're about to do something that we don't often do, which is an interview. And it's with someone that our listeners will be aware of, you know, through his involvement in the Not Quite Right Prize. He's shortlisted twice. He's actually won the New York City Midnight. Overall, like 250 words, like
Which is
won it outright.
crazy.
But he's probably best known as the creator and judge of Furious Fiction, which is the competition that brought us together as like writing flash fiction so many years ago, like all of those 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was. And his name is Dean Corey. And the reason that we're interviewing him is not just because of all of those other things. It's because we're bringing him on as a assistant judge starting in the April round, which is the one that's just coming up. And he will be helping us read a lot of your stories. And like he comes to us with a wealth of experience, many, many years, many hundreds of thousands of stories read.
Millions of words.
Millions of words, billions of words probably.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to bring him on board. It'd be nice to have another set of eyes working on these stories and finding those gems amongst the Not Quite Right Prize entries.
Absolutely. And look, God knows we need the help. We're growing and it's amazing. And I think Dean is exactly the right person with the right skill set to help us out. So welcome, Dean.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here.
So Dean will be joining us in the April round of the prize. And I'm not sure what we're calling Dean. Is it a guest judge or an assistant?
lackey,
Bring out the gimp.
butler. Yeah, I like it.
But of course, it does mean one thing, and that's very sad for me, that I can never win the pointy trophy is out of my reach for good.
And
now.
you were so close.
So close.
I was so close.
Yes.
So close.
Oh,
Yes, if it wasn't for
shedding a
that
tear.
dastardly Athena law, then I might have. Hands on. Oh no, that's when I got fourth. Actually, no, second was to somebody else. So yes.
Well, look, I'm
yeah, no,
sure
it's
they'll
really
be
exciting.
glad. They'll be glad to see you go. Very glad, I'm sure.
It's bittersweet, but I am looking forward to judging. I do love a good judge, and I have definitely read a lot of flash fiction stories over the years.
How many exactly? Like, what are we talking?
There's actually one going on right now as we record. That's the 77th edition of Furious Fiction,
Wow.
which me and Sarah, a co-worker at the Australian Writers Centre back in the day, we created in 2018. So yeah, for the last 7 years, there's been 77 editions, and I did do some maths, and it's 72,000 and a little bit stories overall. I haven't read all of those, but I've read a good, probably say about half, I reckon.
Wow.
In some shape or form. There's been a lot of stories. That's about 36 million words, which I know you like to turn it into words.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is about 61 copies of War and Peace, or 163,000 copies of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. That's a lot of words.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And we run 4 comps a year, and that's a lot of work. But you run 1 comp a month, which is just crazy to me that you can get through that.
Yeah,
and
one every moon, Ed.
every moon.
That's right.
Triggering me here.
Every lunar cycle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a gas leak year where we did it quarterly, but that was, anyone who knows community knows about the gas leak season, but generally it's been every month. And yeah, fast turnaround. And that's probably the one thing which, with judging, it has always been quite furious, the judging. That's just one thing I'll say, is that you really do have to grab, my attention. I'm sure you guys are the same. With flash fiction, it's your shop window. You just have to, that first paragraph is really important. You don't have to have car chases and explosions, but you do need to have something, just something that really hooks you as a reader. We're all the same. First page of a book will be the same sort of thing. We'll know whether or not we want to keep reading.
And so, Dean, we've talked about on the podcast a lot about like Amanda and my preferences when it comes to flash fiction. What are some of your preferences and maybe some of your
Prejudices?
Prejudices, yes.
I do like interesting narrative voices, I guess, or unusual perspectives. That can mean normal things told like in an original way. Strong characters, authentic dialogue is a really good one. I mean, there's some really good stories that are all dialogue, but if it's been done in a really compelling way, those are things that really jump out because you don't have a lot of time. Often you're probably only going to have 1 or 2 characters, and those things, you've got to make those really strong. I am a little bit partial to a non-human perspective. There's been a lot of stories over the years. That's not to say you should all go out and write stories from a table or a dog or anything, but those, I do like a unique idea.
Well, you have many millions of words, so presumably there's some story ideas that crop up all the time, and so that originality is really important. Like to stand out not only in that round of the competition, but just in general, like over your, whole entire history as a judge, that for a story to stand out, that originality is probably one of the easiest ways in a way, because probably a lot of other things have been done so well already, in your view.
Yeah, but what you find is it's often a whole bunch of things that go into making a story a winning story, and you guys are certainly no doubt discovering the same sort of thing. It's a lot of layers. It might be, yes, there's good characters, but also there's a strong opening and they stick the landing, which is another thing which you really have to do. And regardless of whether it's a funny story or a scary story or a sad one, or you have to feel something as a reader. When you read that final line, you have to have that, as what you guys go on a lot about, is that emotional resonance. You have to feel something. It might be shock or surprise if there's some rug-pulling twist at the end. But yeah, so often there's a whole bunch of things that build up to it, and you can get to the end of it. And with flash fiction being so short, you can go back and read it again, and maybe you rediscover some new things, and that can be good. You don't have to. I like a good title, but again, that doesn't have to be, it's not essential, but that can be another layer which people often add in to just make a story just that little bit more strong.
And knowing you, Dean, as well, you love a good pun. So how does a pun stand out to you? Like, you love to write the puns, but when you see a pun in the wild, is that like, does that grab you?
Oh, they're going to be good, Amanda. They're going to be good puns. My standards are pretty high. Look, it's weird, isn't it? Like, I like writing them, but they do have to be pretty strong to get through my defenses. But again, full respect if you can come up with some good. I do like wordplay, but often the title is a really good place to have fun with wordplay, not necessarily the story itself, unless you're going for something really comical. But that's where you can get some double meanings into titles. And it can be, the best ones are where you're not giving away anything, but by the end, you read the title again and you're like, I see what you did there. Yeah. So there is that.
I feel like both of your shortlisted entries, Dean, were quite pun heavy, like very heavy on the wordplay. So I guess that proves that we like it as well.
Yeah, here I am saying that. Well, that's because I wrote those ones, yeah.
And that's fine. If you do it, it's fine.
Well, I think whenever I look at prompts, I'll think about, it's like a little puzzle box. How can I solve this? So what's an original way to represent? So I know the first one I entered with you guys, which was last January, and that was where I told the perspective of a bunch of punchlines, because I think punch was the word. Is that right? I believe back in that one. And so you go through a lot of the, cabs off the rank, Punch and Judy, or Punch is a boxer, and all those kind of things, which are fine, and you can tell great stories. But that was one particular one. I think people can read it on your website, but where I decided to go from a little bit of a surreal perspective. And yeah, there was a lot of puns there, Ed. But one thing that I remember saying to my friends is, it can't just be a conveyor belt of puns, because that does not a story make. So that's one where I'm quite proud of. I managed to put a lot of heart into it and an actual story that went with it. So if you're going to do puns, that is probably a really good tip. If you're going to do puns, then you've got to have something more. You do have to have some strong characters, or at least some emotional resonance as well.
And I remember talking about that on the shortlist episode, which that story featured, is that, they weren't just puns that came and went. Each character there, you'd given a personality that links back to what that pun was. So, yeah, I think that's really important. Characters are a huge part of flash fiction.
I do have some pet hates as a judge.
Oh, yes. Tell us. Tell us. We won't tell anyone. Go.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll just keep it amongst ourselves. Well, I mean, they're fairly straightforward ones, but one of the classic ones, and you've spoken about it before because you are going to find these come up a lot as judges, is the teaser story, where you feel like the action hasn't quite started when the story begins. So that's one which I've seen a lot of over the years. There's also, if you're going to put a twist in, if you can sort of spot it from right at the beginning, that can be very unsatisfying. So sometimes it's better not to have a twist at all if you're going to go for a twist, if it's really obvious. Stories that peter out before getting to the end, like in terms of not sticking the landing, I guess, that's something that you obviously only know once you got to the end of it. But like we want every story we read, we want it to succeed. We're actually starting every story. I'm assuming you guys are the same. You want it to be the best story you've ever read. You're rooting for it.
Yeah.
It's like, come on. And there's some really great stories over the years that could have even won it if they just stuck the landing and they went from that to not making the long list.
Yeah.
So it can be so disappointing sometimes. And there's a couple of other things, unrealistic meet cutes, where someone just decides to say, oh, yes, I'll go on a date with you because they fell over in the supermarket or something. I don't know. It just doesn't. Yeah, things that don't, I think inauthentic situations or dialogue or anything in general, that if you're setting it in reality, I guess, and let's just say it's set in this world, anything that's not authentic can really grate after you've read a number of stories. You really do get quite impressed if someone can tell a story just in a relatable or just authentic way. And often that's quite a normal way. People try to go quite big in flash fiction, but you don't have to. Sometimes it's the quiet scenes. It's the 1 and 2 characters, not the entourage of 12 characters.
Yeah.
You've got to understand the format that you can go small, and sometimes it's those little small moments which make great stories.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times people try to go for like the high concept, and whereas, the human story is a lot more meaningful, I think, a lot of the time. I wanted to ask, so as, just thinking back to the old days before we had Not Quite Right, and Amanda and I were submitting entries in Furious Fiction, and in the background there somewhere you're reading them.
You've gone back, haven't you, and read them? Judged us once again.
I think I did go back when you guys were trolling me about something and just see what the stories you've written. But anyway, Ed, ask your question.
Well, I mean, my first question was, can you please delete them? Because
no, I won't publish them. But yeah, they're not worth publishing anyway.
Fair, very fair.
They're definitely not. And I guess that's what I was leading into, is because, you know, we used to wonder like, oh, why, or I used to wonder at least, like, why isn't this story getting longlisted? Because it's obviously so amazing. But it wasn't. It was absolute rubbish, and going back and looking at that. And I think for us, the experience of running a comp has taught us so many lessons about like how to write good flash fiction. So I just wanted to ask you, having read like a bookshelf full of War and Peace of flash fiction, like, do you think that's had a huge impact on like your own writing? Obviously, you've won New York City Midnight. Do you attribute that to the competition, and like, what are some of the lessons that you've learned?
No, I was brilliant to start with. Yeah, of course, kidding, of course. Absolutely. I don't think Sarah and I, when we started it, realised how much we would learn from judging over the years, and there have been other judges that we use it at the Writers' Centre as well. Mm-hmm. But I think we probably thought originally, we'll learn a lot from the stories that win, because, we'd like to be like them, those ones one day. But you learn a lot from the ones that don't quite make it as well, because it's that whole thing about often you learn more from your failures than your successes. So we're reading a lot of, it sounds horrible, but stories that aren't quite as good, you can see so clearly when you're judging what they're doing wrong, especially once you see them en masse and over and over again. So that has definitely affected my own writing style, because when I started, 7 years ago doing judging, my early stories, don't worry guys, my early stories, and sometimes even some of my current ones miss the mark. It's constantly, you're only as good as your last story. I mean, sure, I won that comp. There's a bunch of other really bad stories around that one as well. But I have learned, I think the more stories you get to read, and it is a real privilege that we do get to read them, it's just amazing how many different ways that people approach the same prompts. That's what I love about competitions like this, the amazing different ways that people take it. And it's just so much fun to see where people go with it. But yeah, in terms of learning, you do pick up different points of view, different ways of, first person, second person, all the different types of perspectives that people bring to it, and just some of the absurdities that there's people who enter Furious Fiction who, might write them as poetry, like rhyming stories. We've got ones that try and get all the prompts in every month in about 30 words. and very rarely are they going to make it to the long list, but it's always really fun to see how everyone's different creative minds work.
But I don't know if you would agree with this too, Dean, but I guess Ed was talking before about how, like, you sit on the outside and you think, well, my story was great and, like, why didn't it make the long list? And I don't know if you'd agree with this, but from my perspective, one of the other things I've learned from judging all these stories is how close a lot of them are to the long list, and how there isn't really always a lot of difference between a story that makes it and a story that doesn't. And it's sometimes just the vibes, or it's sometimes just some tiny little thing that stood in the way, like a fatal flaw kind of thing. And otherwise the story was beautifully written. But like you say, for example, it might have been an amazing, wonderful story, great idea, great characters, and then just didn't quite stick the landing and was therefore, I guess, disappointing. I guess that's my learning. Like, for me, it doesn't mean you wrote a terrible story. It just means on that particular day, someone else got in with something a little bit more resonant or a bit more compelling.
It's such a good point, because it can be so close. And we have had all sorts of feedback from people who miss out. And it is, over the years, and it stings. Any kind of rejection, you're putting yourself out there creatively. It's so corny, but just entering these kind of things is such a win to start with, putting your own work out there into the universe. So many people don't even get to that stage. So that's brave, and you have won just by doing that. But then getting so close, we used to say this is not a referendum on your creativity, your accomplishment as a writer, or how good you are, because it's not a pass-fail thing. It is a sliding scale, and we put a line in. It's so subjective. On a different day, it might be the same judges having, they had just in a different mood that day. It could be that could be the difference between one going one way or one the other. as I said before, a good story is made up of lots of little different ingredients, and one might just have one that they just taste better to that particular judge on the day. So yeah, I think it is so close. When we first started Furious Fiction, we actually didn't have a long list. It was a suggestion from someone in the community who said, and it was a great suggestion because we were only putting out the shortlisted ones for the first year or so. And there were all these other people who were like in the top 10% of all the stories we received. Like, we were getting over 1,000 stories, and they weren't getting any feedback because that is the one thing, because it was a free comp, we weren't able to offer, because it was such a quick turnaround, which was, a shame, just the way we chose to do our comp. For you guys, obviously it's great. People can opt to have that extra feedback if they want, or they get roasted on air even. But yeah, it is so nice once we got the long list, because at least it gave people a bit more of an idea. And then we often joke that we kind of need a longer list where it was like the next 5%, but at which point do you have to draw the line? So yeah, people can miss out by literally, we've had ones where, as I said, they're in the long list, we'll read it, and there might be just something, maybe they even missed one of the words once we go through it. It's like so painful when that happens, because it would be a great story otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have at least just that mention, acknowledgement that you've done something at least halfway right, and you haven't just thrown your story
from
and it's
time
gone
to
nowhere.
time at least. Yeah.
It's definitely encouraging.
People do get upset, and I understand why. And as long as they're always just trying to better themselves as a writer and maybe understand that it's subjective, that's the main thing. That we're never telling anyone you're a terrible writer. It was just that particular story didn't land with us. That's all. And I've been on the other end of it with you guys even.
I was going to say, we've cursed you once or twice.
What?
Yeah, no, we've sent you a few choice. I don't know. Do we have the Dean Voodoo doll here? Just kidding. But yeah, it is painful. But I think sometimes that rage can fuel you onto bigger and better things too. So it's always good to hear a comeback story.
Like Ed said, when you look back on the stories with a bit more, maybe a little bit more distance, and you can see and time, and maybe you've improvement as skills, as a writer, you can actually see it a little bit more objectively that maybe there were reasons why it wasn't picked. And that's always nice. It shows that we're all trying to just grow as writers.
So I want to ask you as well, Dean, like you've heard us talk on the podcast about what we think makes a good flash fiction story, what we, recommend people do and what they shouldn't do. Have you been burning to contradict us on any of our tips? Is there anything that you've been like, no, that's not right? Or is there anything that you have wanted to kick us and tell us while we've been talking?
No, I think you guys are pretty spot on with the generals of what makes a good flash fiction story. I think the funny thing about it is that often it's really hard to define, because often it's the story that surprises you and doesn't do the things that you listed in all your, in a nice little rubric that can be a great story, if that makes any sense. It can be someone just doing something a little, it's like what you say about breaking the rules with the anti-prompt. Often they might know the rules and break them. So it's a really hard thing to define. And I think that's what you're trying to achieve with the anti-prompt with this particular competition is just reminding people that there is no necessary formula or box ticking checklist. However, having said that, I don't really care if you name the character or not. So I'm not gonna disqualify you like Amanda would.
No,
if you start with dialogue, that's just fine with me.
A bit more flexible then. Oh, look.
Yeah, I think it because I've seen a lot of stories. Yes, you can do a lot of different things, but as long as you ground yourself pretty quickly, it depends on the rest of the story. But there's so many different ways to tell stories that I'm not going to necessarily say there's a hard and fast rule for things. So that's probably the thing I might push back on, is I know we like to, and you guys are right in that there are definitely a lot of things that people can do, but there's always rules that can be broken. It's like how you said about, I think early on you said you don't like stories in verse or poetry, and then ended up, awarding some prizes to those. So you can always contradict yourself. That's why anything goes, really.
Yeah. No, look, and I agree. I think while we put out our advice and suggestions, and those things are for a reason, right? Like these things do help ground you in a scene and so on, but it really is an art and a craft. That's how I see it. So the craft part, like if you can understand the rules, if you can practice them and get to understand why they improve your craft, why they generally tend to improve your storytelling, then your art becomes stronger too, because you have all these extra paints in your paint box to work with, and you can for sure break those rules. You can for sure do something completely unexpected and different, but you understand what you're doing and the effect that it has, I think is the key, because for a powerful storyteller, it's about like generating an effect and an experience or a reaction in someone. And you can do that by accident, but certainly having all these techniques and skills and ideas in your back pocket can help you to do that more often and more consistently.
And I think we've tried to work out like what are the tricks to flash fiction and what's the formula, like what's the winning formula. And I just don't think there is one. Like there's not one way to do flash fiction, and it's very hard to say like you've got to do X, Y, and Z. Most of the time, yes, you do, but sometimes you can do something completely different and it can be very successful and very resonant.
Yeah, well, you just got to look at the sort of half dozen or so stories that you've had as winners and shortlisted, and you'll just see such variety. I mean, if we look at the food metaphor again, you can follow the recipe. Everyone gets the same recipe. But then, like you were talking about with the art and the craft, Amanda, you've got the craft part, but then on something like MasterChef, you've got these people that can just then take it and elevate it and use flavors in a whole different way. And they've got this extra creative. And I think with words, it's the same sort of thing. We can do all the things that you guys say, and we've got some great articles on the website. And that's the base, but it really is about getting the art of just knowing how to mix the flavors in a new and exciting and surprising way. Because again, as judges, we are reading a lot of stories, and it is with flash fiction and any competition really, it's about just bringing something that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I've come to call the element of surprise, I guess. And you don't know what it's going to be. That's the whole point. It could be anything, but it's something fresh, something different.
So thanks for joining us, Dean. Thanks for taking time out for chatting with us. And we're looking forward to having you on as a judge in the April round.
Yeah.
Me too. Can't wait.
Should be interesting being on the same side of the judging table for once.
Is there anything you wanted to spruik, or are you starting a podcast? Have you got I don't know.
I am going to start a rival podcast. That's right.
What's it called?
It's called
Quite Right.
Yeah, Quite Right.
Not quite right.
You can follow me on Instagram. That's under Dean Koorey, DeanKoorey. If you're entering competitions, definitely hit me up there. I'm often on the forums posting my stories, so you can see some of my stories there. And if I ever update my website, then that's the same name.com.
Thanks for chatting with us.
Yeah, it's been fun. And I'm looking forward to judging all your stories, or some of your stories. And right on.
Oh, dear. We've created a monster.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Each episode, Amanda and I take turns recommending each other books or movies that we may not have chosen for ourselves. It's a segment we call Get Wrecked. And this time around, it's my turn to shit on Amanda's taste in books.
Well, be careful, because I think a few of our listeners probably have this book.
Yeah, but I can't shit on it too badly because it's actually quite good. And so the topic of conversation today is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And it's a bit of a multifaceted wreck, because you've recommended me Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, Save the Cat writes a novel by Jessica Brody, and the movie that made Blake Snyder famous, which was Blank Check. A problematic movie. And so look,
as we came to learn.
Yeah, it hasn't aged well.
No, it's very mid-90s, let's put it that way. I'm looking forward to talking about it. I've got some thoughts and feelings.
All right. So you recommended these books to me and this movie. Tell me a little bit about your experience with Save the Cat and why you recommended it.
So Save the Cat is a famous craft book, right? It's specific to screenwriting. It's all about how to write an effective screenplay, and pretty much how to write an effective, sort of mass market screenplay, really. Blake Snyder was a screenwriter, and I guess he was sort of putting it into kind of a framework, what are the beats, he calls them. It's a beat sheet, right? What are the beats that a movie needs to have? Let's hit those beats. And he created this framework for screenwriting, which people have since adapted to novel writing. And they're not quite the same, but there is a lot of crossover there and a lot to be learned. And I guess for me, I came to this book because it was recommended. So many people talked about it, and I'm sure many of our listeners have read it or at least heard about it, and you're certainly hearing about it now. And it's the kind of book that is on many writers' bookshelves, whether they're screenwriters or not. And I hazard a guess that most screenwriters have this book or have read this book. But I guess for me, I found it super helpful in learning my craft. I continue to educate myself, but I guess I went through this period where I was just like kind of absorbing as much information as I could, and that was one of the things that I absorbed. And it's one of the things that I go back to regularly and think about a lot, and which I found probably particularly helpful from a structural point of view when you're thinking about the structure of a novel. So yeah, that's, I guess you hadn't read it, which surprises me because it is one of those ubiquitous kind of books. And I guess I wanted to share it with you, get your thoughts. Does it gel with you? Did you get something out of it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to really getting into the detail about what this book offers. And like I'll say at the outset, I think it's a mixed bag. Like I think that there are some real positives and real great ideas here. But I also think that there are some pitfalls and some traps as well. So, yeah, I think what we should do is go through like a lot of these concepts. I don't want to go through every single chapter, but at least hit the main points, talk about where his advice works and where it doesn't work, and also how we can apply that back to flash fiction as well. I think that would be interesting. But I think, like, first of all, let's talk about Blake Snyder and who he is and where that is all coming from. Like, he's putting himself forward as the person with the knowledge, with the process. You mentioned he was a spec screenwriter. Like, he talks very much in this book about like selling screenplays. Yeah. Less so about, you know, how to tell a good story or make a great
something
piece
artistic
of art.
Or,
yeah, how do you sell? It's all very much about selling. So his credentials, I guess, fall onto two movies. One of them you've recommended, which is Blank Check, and the other one is Stop or My Mum Will Shoot.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And I believe Stop or My Mum Will Shoot actually won the Razzie for Worst Screenplay.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, we were just talking earlier with Dean about how we learn from mistakes, right? So maybe he learned a lot from that experience.
All right, so maybe we start with like his credentials. Like, we've just watched Blank Check, both of us, in the last couple of days.
And I'm not sure that I ever did see it because I wasn't sure when I first recommended it. Like, is this something I've seen in the past? I certainly don't remember it.
And so I mentioned when I looked up the IMDb in our last regular episode when you recommended this, that the featured review, the top-rated review, said far-fetched and acceptable. Like, I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
Like, it is very far-fetched. And putting it in the context of what was happening at that time, like the early to mid-90s and like the Home Alones and all that kind of thing, I feel like there was a bit of a gold rush for this kind of media.
It definitely felt like it was, no pun intended, but cashing in on what was big at the time. Yeah. And the actor Brian Bonsall is almost a wannabe Macaulay Culkin kind of thing. They got this cute kid, and like, let's make him a bit sassy and try and leverage that. And he was actually the youngest child in Family Ties. He played the youngest child. Yeah, Andy, I think, is the character's name. You know, Michael J. Fox and Justine Bateman's little brother. And, you know, super cute in that as well, and a little bit precocious or whatever. So they're obviously trying to get that kind of celebrity actor of the time and the moment and make the most of that opportunity. So I definitely think watching it back, I'm like, this feels like a cash grab almost, like it just kind of that riffing off what's big, and I mean, we're just talking about this, but like not necessarily adding that much value or uniqueness.
And I think, look, so this movie definitely feels really formulaic and derivative, and that's a big part of it. And that's one of the cautions, I think, with this process that he outlines, is that it is formula. Like, it's a formula.
Yeah, literally.
So literally a formula, and it can't help being formulaic.
All right, so give us a little bit of a synopsis of the film for those who haven't seen it. I mean, the title does speak for itself, but...
Yeah. So Blank Check, we have our main character. What's the kid's name? Do you remember?
Preston.
So Preston essentially starts out as kind of he's in a family where the father is like, you've got to make money. For some reason, it's a weird character. Like, he sets this expectation for his kids that they've got to like be productive, make money. He comes across this situation where, due to timing and circumstances, he gets a blank check and he's able to write anything on that. And he's able to get away with it because the people on behalf of whom he's cashing this check are these kind of gangster mobster type guys, and they have a need to launder the money or pass on this money, and the bank manager is in on it and thinks that he's part of the plan, so he gets all this money. And so then really it's a wish fulfillment movie for
100%.
boys,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And he goes
Well,
through
for
the
kids more generally in terms of that, like what would you do if you had $1 million kind of question.
Well, I say boys because there is a relationship that is a little bit problematic, which, like, we'll talk about this relationship in which this, I'm not sure how old he is. He's like 10.
He's 11.
He's 11. Okay. So he has a relationship with a lady who is, I mean, she's an adult.
She's in her 30s.
She's in her 30s, is she? I feel like that bit was more wish fulfillment for the writers than it was
I think
for,
so too.
for him. Because, like, as a former 10, 11-year-old boy, I wasn't interested in 30-year-old women at all.
Not at all.
So that was a bit weird.
I have some thoughts on that, but we'll get to that. So yeah, basically he cashes the check for $1 million in 1994.
Yeah.
And also spends way more than that. Like you could see even in 1994 terms, this is more than $1 million.
He doesn't spend it wisely.
He does not. And nor would you in that situation. But, you know, he buys VR shit, which, God, must be actually cheaper now. That's probably the one thing that's cheaper.
He buys an actual castle.
Yeah, he buys a literal castle. He has a wall of CRT TVs.
Yeah.
He has this virtual reality headset. He's got one of those big sumo wrestling inflatable like battle zones in the backyard. He's got a little racetrack. He's got the ultimate, which I want one day, a water slide from the office into the pool.
That's pretty handy.
Just all those things, which I don't know if you ever did this or if this is just a nerd thing that I did, but like when I was a kid, I would draw my dream house and like what it would have. And it would totally have things like a slippery dip or a water slide from a room in the house to the swimming pool. And then you'd have a whole room which is just full of whatever, stuffed toys or whatever you were into at the time. And that's exactly what this film was. It was just every kind of thing you could imagine. And there's this whole montage where they're like rollerblading through the shopping center and stuff, which is just
90s.
Beautifully 90s, which I enjoyed thoroughly. I did find it weird that like he's like, okay, the first thing I want to do is go and buy clothes.
Yeah.
Which is a very strange thing for an 11-year-old to do as their first choice. But secondly, after that, okay, I've got $1 million. I've decided I want to get stylish. The first place I'm going is Roots, Canada. Very odd choice. Like, where's the Armani or whatever?
So, like, we'll get into Blake Snyder's process a little bit later and, you know, his formula, but that is the wish fulfillment part of the movie. And I found that really informative, like the idea of, like, you've got this part of the movie and from one point to another, it's about 15, 20 minutes worth of the movie in which, as he describes in his process, the promise of the premise is paid off. And you get like the bit that you came to see is that wish fulfillment. What would happen as an 11-year-old boy if I had $1 million, what would I spend it on?
Yeah.
And that pretty much is the movie you came to see.
Yeah.
Right. And when you've pointed that out in the book, then you see that in other movies, that is in the same spot, like, I don't know, Pretty Woman in the part where she kind of goes shopping and then she comes back and throws it in their face. Like, that's the bit that you came to see.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an action movie, you want the car chase. You go to Fast and the Furious, where's the bit with the street racing? I mean, it's the whole thing, but like, you know, but yeah, like the action bits. Where's the chopper crash? In the romance, like where's the will they, won't they? Like the whole time, that kind of thing. And it is enjoyable, right? The kids were loving it. We watched it as a family last night and they were having a good laugh and enjoying all the crazy antics.
Yeah, and look, the rest of the movie, like, it's formulaic. It's exactly as you predict. The bad guys catch up and they get him and something is worked out where he ends up coming out on top and everything he has done to that point turns out to be okay. The bad guys take the fall and everything is not back to normal because it's better. Like you do get that change, but it's okay. And, you know, everything works out well for everyone at the end.
Yeah.
So as like an entry in this genre, it's fine, but it is really unrealistic.
Yeah. I mean, even for the time, he was spending way more than $1 million worth of stuff.
But just his ability to spend it and his ability to bring people on. He had this idea of, you know, he realized early on that, like, no one's going to believe a child. You know, if a child tries to buy things, then people are going to question it. So he invents this persona of Macintosh, who's like the behind-the-scenes millionaire who he works for that allows all this stuff to happen. which itself raises a whole bunch of questions like, who's this dude that hires you to do all this bullshit? And people kind of go along with it for a little while and it's explained in the story, but it is also stretched really thin. And like, if you've ever bought a house, right? Like, so that's a difficult thing to organize as an adult, but this kid just kind of buys this castle.
And then he kind of moves in later that day.
Yeah, and he moves in and all of these trucks come in and they move all this awesome shit into the house.
Within 6 days. Like,
it's a lot to organise and a child is not organising all that shit.
Yeah.
They do have this character that he's kind of a bit of a computer genius.
I mean, you definitely have to suspend disbelief for all of that stuff. And kids don't know that stuff.
No.
Kids don't know how it all works.
It's a kid's movie.
And there is just one minor effort to explain that away, which is, you know, he accidentally gets a blank check from his grandma for his birthday and it's all explained and like, this is how a check works, you know, kind of thing at that moment. So that when he gets a blank check later at the bank, like he stumbles upon one basically, he knows exactly what to do with it to the point where he perfectly prints $1 million on it. The first go off an old school printer. Yeah, it's completely unbelievable. But at the same time...
That's the part that I believe that Blake Snyder calls theme stated in his formula.
I actually believe the theme stated is in the opening scenes where the father says the golden rule.
Oh, yeah.
He who makes the gold makes the rules. That is the theme of this film. So it is very explicitly stated right up front. And in fact, called back on later. Yeah. So he does do that very, very explicitly in that film. And then, you know, from there comes the character's want, right? I want my own house. I want my own rules. And he starts creating an actual physical wish list of the things that he wants, which includes like $1 million or whatever, a girlfriend, his own house, like all of these things tick, 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 which he ticks off during the film because he makes all this money. And of course, naturally, by the end of the movie, we learn that really it's the friends we make along the way or whatever. Like it turns back around to what he really wanted was some attention from his dad, which he finally gets and all of that sort of thing. And, you know, money can't buy you happiness kind of message by the end.
Which is a great message. I just wish that like his whole problem at the beginning was his father not paying attention to him and telling him you need X, Y, and Z to be a meaningful member of this family. But at the end, the father changes to be very much like, no, actually, I really love you and care for you. But there's no reason for him to go through that change. Like that wasn't part of the plot. He just conveniently changes into a better parent at the end of it.
And I think that's my biggest criticism of this film is that it's not fully developed, right? You mentioned it's derivative. Like I would love to know when it was actually written because there are movies coming out at that time in the years prior that this feels very explicitly derivative of. So one is clearly Home Alone. I think most people are familiar with Home Alone, but we've got these antics where a young child's left home alone and he's fighting off these robbers that are trying to come and, you know, break and enter into the home and steal from his home. And he's fighting them off with this series of pranks, basically, like kiddie pranks. Now, this is happening in Blank Check as well. He's got the baddies are after him and now he's shooting his, what do you call it, a baseball gun at them. And they trip down the slide into the pool and it's like, it's very Home Alone antics kind of thing.
And that happens in like the last 20 minutes or so. And for me, that felt really tacked on. And it felt to me as like they had this plot written out and then Home Alone broke through and they're like, hang on, we can just add this to the end and that will kind of, and I don't know if that was him because obviously these scripts get sold. That's what speculative screenwriting is. You sell the script and then it gets developed. So it may have changed after the fact.
I guess what I'm trying to say is my criticism is it doesn't have cohesion. It lacks cohesion. It lacks like its own internal logic. It just is a bunch of stuff that's thrown together. And yes, it's thrown together in an amusing and entertaining way. It's certainly the kind of movie that we enjoyed watching as a family and the kids were laughing and all of that. I happily watched the whole thing. I wasn't bored. But it didn't grab me. Like Home Alone is my all-time favourite movie. I mean, Home Alone is many things and that's part of the issue, I guess. It's its musical score. It's its costuming department. It's like the sets. It's obviously the script, it is the acting talent, it is all of these things packaged into one whole that was, to me, unbeatable. And then whereas this one, it's like, I'm just trying to take this and take that. And the actual piece that comes away is just a bunch of parts that are kind of shoved together and not its own thing. And like, I think the most telling part of that is, and like we know that one of the biggest parts of Home Alone is Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah.
Home Alone is nothing without Macaulay Culkin. We know that. They've tried it. Yeah. And it fails without him. And it fails without John Hughes too. But him as an actor and him as a character and as an idea is like a transcendent thing that you only get every now and then. You've got this other character who is totally cute, great actor, got a bit of sass, but it's not all there.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking character development in the movie, he's already a sassy character. He's got his backstory. He's got his anger. He's got his reasons for being who he is. And then you've got Preston who, like his older brothers are driving him mental, a la Buzz in Home Alone or whatever. His parents are ignoring him. But it all feels farcical and unrealistic and like it lacks emotional resonance. It lacks reality and it lacks depth. He's just a kid whose parents are shitting on him, but there's not that nuance of like the love and the things that the relationship Kevin has with his mother in Home Alone that's like complicated but like so full of love compared to like this dad is just obsessed with money and it's kind of more Chevy Chase kind of farcical comedy. And as a result, when this kid starts doing these crazy things later in the movie, you're like, where did that come from? He's just a kid. Like he didn't have that at the start. He's just suddenly got this like charisma and confidence that just came from nowhere.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny that you say that because Home Alone, like on paper, is a highly unrealistic film, right? Like the two robbers, they come and try and steal shit and they fall for like the dumbest like booby traps. But it doesn't feel unrealistic.
And then they like stand still while like the paint
they
can
stand still
hits.
And they go,
they scream at it while it swings to their face.
Yeah, so it's unrealistic, but that's not the problem.
No.
But it is a problem with Blank Check because it doesn't really come from like a place of authenticity.
Yeah,
right?
it's really not.
And that's a problem, I think, with viewing the screenwriting process from this formulaic perspective of like, I've got to hit this beat, I've got to hit this beat. And this movie hits all the beats, but it misses like, I guess, maybe the point and why those beats are there. And just to return a little bit to Blake Snyder, and I think one of the things that is recurring through this book is the fact that like he's this really successful spec screenwriter and he lists all of these screenplays that he's sold throughout the years and like I sold this one for $1 million, I sold this one for $1 million. But you've never heard of these movies because they didn't get made. Yeah. And so like for me, that's a little bit of a red flag that, and I'm not saying this is all it is, but a lot of this is like, here is a guide on how to sell something to an executive. Yeah. Right. And so you've got to do X, Y, and Z because an executive is going to like understand that and latch onto it and see the sales potential, but not that you're actually creating a product that people want to watch.
Or not even a product, but like a piece of art or a piece of like...
Yeah, I mean, it's not really about the movie. It's about how do you sell that movie. And so much of this is stopping at the sales perspective. And like, you've got to think about like your audience and blah, 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 and make sure that's all in how you're thinking about it. But it's not coming at it from, I want to create a movie and how do I take my movie idea and develop it in a way that maximizes the emotional impact and makes audiences want to see it. It is all about how do I sell my script. And this is one of those scripts that like on paper looks really great. I think Blank Check captures a lot of what was going on at that time. Like you mentioned Home Alone and like we've got all these movies that it resembles and you can see like why it got bought and why there's a bidding war for it. But at the same time it falls flat because it misses the art.
It lacks heart.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's what Home Alone does have is that heart to it, like the passion. And I think that's key to John Hughes films in general. Like he was very much like, his work wasn't autobiographical as such, but it was very much himself that he was putting into his stories. And I'm obviously a fan of John Hughes' work, but his movies have more heart, right? Like they come from his heart. It's something he needed to say to the world. And he made it happen. And what you're suggesting here, and I agree with you actually, is that this isn't about heart. This is about money. And look, that's okay. You can make movies for money. That's a valid reason to make movies. It was entertaining and so on. But there's a big difference in how it's received, I think. And when you watch a movie like this and you're just like, okay, it's tick that box, it's tick that box, tick, tick, tick. And it was nice. It's the kind of movie you come in and go, oh, yeah, it was all right. But then you come out of some movies and you're like, oh, my God, that changed me. Or that's a part of me now. And I don't think Blank Check's a part of me. you know, in the way that Home Alone would be. And obviously, you know, there's the context of when you watch it and that sort of thing. But I think you would easily find more people who view a John Hughes film as like transformative or in some way deeply moving versus this film, which is like, it was a bit of fun. And I mean, it's down to like the kid, Preston, does the Macaulay Culkin eyebrow raise at one point. You know, the little eyebrow raise, and it just doesn't land. It's like you're just copying something that you saw. You're parroting something, and therefore it doesn't have that heart.
So, you know, Ernest Hemingway often quoted, when you start writing, like start with a true thing, you know?
One true thing.
That idea is nowhere near Blake Snyder's process.
No.
And we'll get to the process about where to start writing and how to develop it, but that's not a consideration. And it shows, I think it really shows in a movie like this, and also Stop or My Mum Will Shoot. Like it's the same thing. It's like, I think there's some really great things to learn, but I don't necessarily think like this is how to write. You know, it's important to be skeptical about that. And actually, just because I raised Stop or My Mum Will Shoot, I want to raise something that I came across on IMDb under trivia for Stop or My Mum Will Shoot. Again, written by Blake Snyder. This is one of 2 major movies that he got made. And he, in Save the Cat, he mentions like another 2 or 3 that he sold for $1 million, and very successful speculative screenwriter for selling those. But they never got made into movies. These 2 did. So according to Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger was interested in playing the lead in this movie. Stallone admitted in an interview that once he heard that Schwarzenegger wanted to do the movie, he immediately called his agent and campaigned for the leading role. He found out much later that Schwarzenegger faked interest in order to trick him into doing the movie.
Is it a Stallone movie?
Yeah, Stop on My Mum Will Shoot. It stars Sylvester Stallone.
I've probably seen it, but it's just completely gone from my memory.
What a great move by Arnie there.
Oh, my God. But look, in terms of wish fulfillment, yes, it's wish fulfillment for boys, for sure. And certainly for me, like that whole, you bought an actual castle and you have a slide down to your pool and all that sort of stuff is still my dream at 41 years of age. So all of these moments to me are really good fun and definitely, you know, it's fun to watch in that way. But there's no way it didn't go deeper than that. It was just that. It was just like crazy fun idea after crazy fun idea, but no like thread or cohesion to all those ideas.
Yeah. Look, I think very forgettable is the bottom line. Like you can have these moments that are great. And if I were a 11-year-old boy, I might come out of that movie thinking, yeah, that was fun. And there weren't any dull bits where you were just like, oh, God, what? Like nothing's happening. Like something was always happening.
Didn't slow down.
Yeah. And like that's very much part of the process and the formula. But at the end of the day, like it's over and it's completely over.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay with you.
No, it doesn't. And it won't. Well, actually, I take that back. There is a little something that might be staying with me for a little while. And that is the relationship, the wish fulfillment, as you call it.
Of the writer here, not necessarily the 11-year-old character.
And do you know what? I think maybe that's part of the problem, that in Home Alone, it's very kids' perspective, right? It's very much written with a child in mind, whereas Blank Check does feel like it's an adult.
Yeah.
Like, what's that line? Like, the steep Ashimi.
Hey, fellow kids.
Hey, fellow kids. Yeah. It really smacks of that.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I'm going to put all this stuff that I loved as a kid, but like I'm not thinking as a kid now. I'm an adult, like looking back and trying to apply all that stuff now without ever really thinking what's the experience going to be for a kid. And yeah, there's all this like sexual stuff, like this inappropriate stuff. Even Tone Loc's character checking out a woman in the hallway and like, I mean, that's very 90s
this
too.
is all there for the dads, by the way.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, this incredibly creepy storyline where, you know, it starts out innocent enough. We've got Preston comes to the bank and he sees this gorgeous mid-30s woman as the bank teller, very Demi Moore look, short cropped hair and so on. And he just falls in love instantly and he can't get his words out. He's just like, and that's cute. That bit's cute. And then it gets really fucking weird really quick.
I think they get out of it a little bit in the fact that, like, she wasn't in it for him. She was a secret undercover, spoilers.
Yeah.
She was a secret undercover FBI agent who was trying to catch the bad guys
the whole
time. Like, it's unrealistic. And, like, look, violating one of Blake Snyder's own rules of adding shit on top of other shit. But like, okay, that explains why she was in it and why she kind of went along with it. Maybe she was also a little bit gullible, like believing this random 11-year-old boy, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing it doesn't explain is that kiss at the end. Like that kiss is the one thing, like, but then they just like pash.
Why? Well, I mean, that's going a bit far. It's not exactly a pash, but it's definitely a proper kiss on the lips. Why was that not a kiss on the cheek? That's all it needed to be, a kiss on the cheek, and it still would have been weird, but at least it would have been less weird. But we've got her, okay, so you say it's like all explained away. We've got her repeatedly and unnecessarily saying, it's a date to him.
Yeah.
Which is a movie trope and is fun usually, but so weird in this case. If you said it once, we could brush it off, but you've said it more than once now. We've got her in the limo with him, in the back of the limo, like leaning in. After saying it's a date, she proceeds to wear like a very flirty dress to this restaurant meal with this child, which again, okay,
who's 11?
Who is 11
Who's not
years
17 and a half?
No, he's not. And it's just weird. And then they go for a run in the fountain because that's his childlike, add-on. Oh, the restaurant's too fancy. And he's like, how do you feel about burgers? I love burgers. And then they go for a run in a fountain. And of course they're all wet because that's just what you have to do is just get wet in the fountain. And it's like, what is actually happening here? And she's like, they're doing the little twirly dance in the fountain and she's just giggling and having a great time. You cannot explain that. Yeah. That's too far. It's crazy.
I think the only mitigating factor is that the whole time she's like, where's Mr. McIntosh? When am I going to meet Mr. McIntosh? I think she had an expectation all of that time that maybe he was going to turn up.
Okay, but Mr. McIntosh is not in the back of the limo with you while you're like leaning in seductively to this 11-year-old boy.
It's awkward.
It's so awkward. It's very strange behavior. Very strange. So sadly, that's what I'm taking with me from this movie. Just that memory of just being creeped out by that and thinking, what is this? What is happening here?
So we've talked about Blake Snyder's credentials and these two movies. So those are the outcomes. Those are the outputs of this process. And like I said at the outset, like I'm not that impressed with those two movies. Like in this book, I'm sure it's stated like the most successful spec screenwriter of all time kind of thing. And like there's two movies that he sold, both of them not outstanding, and then a whole host of other movies that he sold that didn't get made. So like credentials wise, and I read the book first and then found out about the credentials. So like that didn't cloud my judgment of the book, but I want to just like raise these red flags as we go into this discussion.
And just on that though, like I did highlight last episode when I recommended this to you that I can see him as being the type, like me, I teach, right? Yeah. Like there is a skill in that. Like you can be analytical, right? And you can learn through the process of doing as he has done, and he has had success, but you can analyze what other people do. That doesn't mean you can do it. And clearly he is the kind of person who sees something and tries to replicate it rather than this kind of genius who just comes up with these ideas. He's very much like riffing off the stuff that he's seen. Yeah. And so you raise his credentials and it's a totally valid point. But also I think that doesn't necessarily mean you don't know what you're talking about.
No, like I completely agree. But just in line with what you're saying, I did go on Reddit and look at what people's view of Blake Snyder is and this book in general. And there was mixed views, as you'd expect. But just in line with what you were saying, one person, Scorpius, 11 years ago said, my impression is that he's a guy who struck a bit of gold, then realised that there is much more reliable money in selling shovels than in actually continuing to dig. So, he sold these scripts and he came at a time probably when it was a lot easier to sell scripts than it is now. And a lot more lucrative. Like $1 million in the early 90s was a lot of money, and compared to now it's still a lot of money. But it was even more money back then. Yeah. But again, not to say that he's wrong or that there's a problem with this process, because I think it's really informative and useful as a process. So why don't we get into what his process is?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Save the Cat it's 8 chapters, and chapters 1 to 5 are like his framework. Chapters 6 to 8 are like just extras, little tidbits, which are useful in themselves. So like I want to talk about the framework first and what he lays out as like how to write the killer screenplay, and then we can get into some extras, and then we can get into Save the Cat Writes a Novel. But as we go, I'd like to also talk about how these concepts apply or don't apply to flash fiction. So what Blake Snyder outlines here is not just like some writing tips. It's not just how you make your screenplay better. It's like from conception or from inception, I guess, to then how do you develop that? And all of this happens, chapters 1 to 6, before you even start writing, which I thought was interesting. Like it's not how to write better dialogue, better prose. It's very top down, which is like really useful as someone who is sitting there with zero ideas of how to generate an idea. So where he starts is the log line, what he calls the log line, or what's known as the log line. And it's like the tagline of the movie, which is an interesting place to start. Like you start at the end. You start with what's on the movie poster, basically, and then you reverse engineer that movie. I don't know how much I love this as an idea, but I think it is actually really productive.
Yeah, and look, I've got some friends in my writers group, the Coven, who have sort of almost been given that advice in the romance writing field. Start with your title. What's your title? And work back from there. And I get it, actually.
Yeah.
I actually think, and this is, again, a market where you're trying to sell. So it's not necessarily about creating high art, and that's not to say that these books aren't great. They are, but they're more written for that sort of mass appeal, like a bit of fun. They're not written to be like the next piece of Shakespeare. That's not the objective here. So again, writing to sell, and let's be real, in romance, like the title will sell your book for you. If you've got a clever title, it's almost like a high concept title.
Yeah.
And then that's half your battle to making the sale.
Yeah, and 100%. And yes, logline and title is where he says you start with the logline, you move to the title, and then the title has to kind of loop back, and it has to, he highlights the idea of irony feeding into it. And, in Blank Check, it's like kid who has no money gets money. Like that's the irony.
No, the irony is kid who has no money gets unlimited almost money. Yeah.
And as you said, it's high concept. And in this book, he's very defensive about the term high concept.
Explain what you mean by high concept. What would be an example?
I think like for me, it's in comparison. Like if you say high concept, it means that the concept is the story, or it's the salient thing of the story. Like Home Alone, kid gets left behind, he has to fight against, right? That's the key thing. But if you talk about Godfather, like what's the concept? It takes a few paragraphs to describe, and it's not really about that kind of thing. Whereas for Home Alone, it is kind of about that, Yeah. So for me, it's that concept forming like the core of really what this is all about.
And it being something that is like so digestible.
Yeah.
That everyone just goes, like they get it. You don't have to say any more. You've told them your one-line idea and they get it immediately.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my understanding of high concept. But you said he was being defensive about it.
Look, I think it's because he uses this as a starting point, saying your story has to be high concept to sell.
Yeah.
And again, this is sales focused. It's not saying that a good story is always high concept, but he's kind of saying like to get an executive's attention, you need to be able to give it to them in a line.
Yeah.
And they need to understand why that would be appealing in a line. And like Blank Check works well.
Yeah.
Stop or My Mum Will Shoot. You can summarize that in a line. And then everything kind of is derived from that. It's satisfying as a sales pitch. But is it satisfying as a movie experience? Not necessarily. But still, I think that's a great place to start. I think like if you're sitting down and you're unsure of what to write, or you have like some vague idea, I think this is a productive exercise to then think, well, okay, how can I make that like a concept that is compelling?
And you talk about, okay, let's compare back to flash fiction, right? I think this idea of a high concept is hyper relevant in flash fiction and in particular in microfiction, because in some cases, all you have is time to express a concept and the reader needs to fill in all the blanks on their own kind of thing. So I think if you have a high concept idea for a piece of microfiction, that's going to get you a long way.
Yeah.
What's just this nugget of like just a wow idea that anyone picking it up would just be like, wish I'd thought of that, or that just touches on something so key about the human experience or whatever. And it might be like a particular metaphor or it might be just a particular observation, but it's delivered very concisely.
Yeah.
Whereas in microfiction, for example, you don't have a lot of time to develop a whole character with a whole backstory. You're relying on the reader to fill in a lot of blanks in a satisfying way for them. And so you can potentially use concept to do that.
Look, I think that's true, but I think it's also potentially a pitfall.
Maybe.
If you construct your stories so ironically that it's also a little bit predictable. It's also a little bit safe. But I think it does help, as you say, to have this clear view in your head about what your concept is and why that would be appealing to a reader.
But I think there is a level at which, like in a competition setting, for example, and again, I'm saying particularly microfiction, that you kind of need a high concept up to a point. Like, what is going to make your story stand out? You don't have time for the character to be Macaulay Culkin. You know, like maybe if you're incredibly lucky and incredibly talented, you can evoke a whole character in just a line or two in a way that's going to win you the comp. But like you also need some sort of really compelling idea, and not always, right? Not always. There are other ways of winning a competition, but it just feels like that's a huge part of it. Like, what's your core idea that people just go, yes?
I guess where I disagree, and I don't entirely disagree, but I guess where I disagree is that in flash fiction, you're not trying to sell a concept and you're not trying to get people into the cinema. You're not trying to sell a ticket because there's no investment to read your story. It's really short. They'll read it in a minute and a half. And what's really important is the story itself. And so in this chapter 1 where he lays out like logline and title as, you know, things that work together to really like underline your story and be what your story is about, I think they're much less important in flash fiction because you're not relying on your title to bring people to the table.
That's true.
They're just going to read the story and they're going to be yes or no. And the story is way more important than the concept. It's more important than the title.
And I'm not saying they have to all be like the same high concept kind of style where it's like kid gets a blank check and can buy whatever he wants. Like that's not what your story is, because that's not a story. That's a log line.
Yeah.
But like you still have to deliver something like wow to a point in just a few lines.
Yeah.
And I don't know, let the idea do a lot of that work for you in a way, in evoking feelings and in kind of communicating ideas. The idea itself has to be strong.
Yeah.
Because you can't rely on your beautiful writing all the way through. It's like you sometimes have only a few sentences. So it's tough.
So I want to ask the question, like going back a little bit to like why you recommended this, and this is obviously a big influence on you, and you've written a book called Go Big or Go Home that we've talked about on the podcast.
Excuse me, that's the working title.
That's the working title. So, and I don't know what your log line, and like, I want to ask you the question, like, have you applied these concepts to your own writing? Because I can see some of the structural things, and we'll come to those in a minute, like that they do apply to your writing. Did you embrace this idea of a log line? You've used Goonies for Girls as kind of a starting point. Like, is that your log line?
First of all, yes, I absolutely used Save the Cat before I started writing this novel and after I started writing earlier iterations of this novel, which are very different.
Yeah.
But it was part of my learning experiences, absorbing this along with all sorts of other information about how to write. And so in this most recent iteration, yes, pretty much did the beat sheet thing. In my case, it was a spreadsheet. I used Save the Cat. I used a 3-act structure. I used a few different things together in this spreadsheet to give me an idea of how to flesh out that middle, because anyone who's written a novel knows that the middle's the hardest part.
Yeah.
And how do we give it substance?
Yeah.
And one thing I will say for this book is that it helps you give your middle substance big time. It's probably its number one, like, yes.
Yeah.
Like, and so it absolutely helped me get from A to Z all the way from the start to the end of this story and fill in those blanks with meaningful content, not just stuff that happens. In terms of the log line, I suck at that. That's hard. And honestly, like my book is not high concept at all. It's got a lot going on. It is difficult to describe in one line. I struggle to do that. I have got I can say Goonies for Girls, but that's not really what it is. That was, I guess, my inspiration for how I went about writing it. And I did, as part of the exercise, analyse the structure of the Goonies. And in fact, more than Save the Cat, use the structure of the Goonies to map my story. Yeah. And there are beats in the Goonies that are happening in my book. Not because I'm trying to rip it off, but because I found that a helpful way to figure out where my story was going. And that, you know, what's happening in my plot is very, very different to what's happening in the Goonies. But there are these pivotal moments which are, I guess, explained in Save the Cat, which I can then go and analyse the Goonies and know what they're trying to do and apply that to my own story. So it was 100% a major plotting exercise with spreadsheets and cards and all sorts of stuff before I started. And to me, the other benefit is that once you start writing and you start to discover things and your characters start to misbehave and go and create subplots that you weren't planning for, you can actually weave that back and weave that forward into your story more easily when you have it all there, like mapped out already.
Yeah.
And when you're working with limited time like I am, and when you're coming to things in fits and starts, it does help to have a map that you're going by. If you're writing every single day, you don't need the map so much. But when you're writing in like a week here and a week there, with months in between, years in between sometimes, it does help to have a guideline of where to go next.
Yeah, when we talked about Go Big or Go Home, I think that was one of the things that I mentioned that stood out to me about it as like something that was really strong is the structure and the fact that there is always change happening from scene to scene. You're not just following the same characters from one scene to another and, you know, like it's not one thing happening after another. It is scenes that have different emotions attached and scenes that have different conflicts and different goals, and things are constantly changing and interesting throughout the whole story. And I didn't know where that came from. And then reading this afterwards, I'm feeling like a lot of it did come from this.
Yeah.
So,
and in fact, and we'll get to this specific section, but there was one thing in particular inspired by Save the Cat, which is the Hightower surprise, which I fed into my book as an idea of how to flesh out probably the climax as well, because the climax is a whole host of things. It's not just one moment. There's a whole bunch of stuff that feed into the climax. And that's something that I did take directly from Save the Cat to try and enhance my novel. But, you know, probably I would give my own book the same criticism we might give to Blank Check, which is that it's a whole bunch of stuff and like I've thought very hard about ticking all these boxes and forgotten maybe the heart part. And there is heart in my book. Like it is me putting myself on the page. Absolutely. It's my passion coming out, but also I'm trying so hard to tick these boxes that I do lose that flow and that truth at times, I think, because I'm just trying to make the puzzle pieces all fit together instead of just letting it be messy a little bit. It ends up being messy anyway.
okay, so I've talked about logline and title. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is Give Me the Same Thing, Only Different. And it asks the question, what you're writing, what is it most like? And he creates in this chapter, like, I think it's 10 types of movies, which aren't really genres, but they're
Like a trope almost, or like a
yeah,
formula?
I think he actually calls them genres, but within these, you can also write a comedy or a romance or whatever. And I'm not going to go through them all. They're Monster in the House, Golden Fleece, Out of the Bottle, like these ideas that he's kind of saying these are the 10 things that any movie that you can think of is one of these things. It's interesting in the way that it compares like vastly different movies.
Yeah.
As an example, like under the genre institutionalized, he compares One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with American Beauty. So very different movies, but the same quote unquote genre. I think that's a useful exercise, but I also feel like it's a bit like astrology, right? And it's a bit like because none of these movies were written with this process as the basis.
Yeah.
He's like, I've got these 10 genres and here is where they're similar. True. But at the same time, those similarities are not what makes those movies great. And I think just copying the points of similarity is not going to deliver a great script. So I think that's a pitfall where I think like, yes, it's insightful. And from like a film criticism perspective, like it's great to identify those. And as a writer, whether you're writing a movie or a novel or whatever, I think it's helpful to identify those similarities. I also don't think that utilizing that as a formula is correct because those movies were not written with that formula. If that makes sense.
Well, it does. I think, though, many movies were written with a 3-act structure in mind, and certainly screenwriters would be using their own formulas. And I'm not up on, apart from Save the Cat, what screenwriters would be using, but certainly 3-act structure, right? Of course. And 3-act structure is not just 3 acts. There's other components to that theory which have been expounded on by other people who have analysed storytelling structure. So there are other models for, I guess, breaking down 3-act structure into other component parts. You know, we talk about the hook, for example, and the opening scenes and stuff like that, and the linking parts between each scene and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, because Save the Cat is based on a 3-act structure, there will be a lot of similarities anyway. So yes, okay. I guess to me he's analysing and that's helpful. Well, let's analyse something that's successful so that we can, I guess you've got to mimic before you can master, right? And so I see myself as being in the mimicry stage where I'm analysing, I'm trying to understand what works, I'm trying to understand what doesn't so that I can create something great. And there is that whole... It's the 4 stages of competence. Okay, I've had to Google this because I don't know, right? But there's unconscious incompetence. So you don't know what you don't know. Then it moves to conscious incompetence. So like I know that I don't know anything. Then it moves to conscious competence. So like I'm learning, I'm doing, I know what I'm doing up to a point, and moves on finally to unconscious competence where I just don't even think about it. I'm just competent. So I guess it's this conscious incompetence stage. Yeah. I know that I don't know. So what I've got to do is educate myself. I've got to just inhale what I can about understanding what I don't know so that I can learn, so that I can do. And I think he helps at that stage. And speaking for myself, I feel like maybe I've gone beyond that stage now. And I think, you know, I've written these like 3 whole novels now, 3 drafts. The next one would be much less structured in that way because I'm not relying on that crutch as much. And I think it would be better for that. But at the same time, I'd be still using a lot of that knowledge about how the structure works. And I'd certainly still be pulling that book out if I struggled in the middle of my story to find something to plug the gap. So
yeah, and look, I will say, like, personally, reading this, I did find it really illuminating and I was excited to talk about it because the structure and the outline that he presents, like, I feel like that is a key that unlocks a lot of interesting and important things about story structure and what makes a story interesting. What I find a little bit of a problem and a pitfall here is that way of applying this backwards to a lot of different movies. And what I mean by that is that, okay, so I think he gives an example of like, well, The Godfather, even though it doesn't look like it follows this structure, like here is beat A, B, C, and it does follow this structure. And you can look at that and go, yes, I guess it does, but also that's not what makes it great. Like, and he's choosing arbitrary points in those movies that follow a certain structure and saying, well, see, if you follow this structure and write all these different types of screenplays, like you two can be successful. You know, we've seen from the 2 movies that he has made that they're not really that great. And I don't think by mimicking just certain arbitrary elements of good movies do you also come up with a good movie yourself. And so I think that's a bit of a pitfall, and that's why I said it's a bit like astrology, because you're choosing these arbitrary points and saying, hey, like that correlates to this and that correlates to that. But is that actually what makes it good? Yeah. And I don't think it necessarily does. But yes, I will say the structure part of it is really helpful to like a certain kind of storytelling, let's say, and one that keeps you engaged and interested.
So in terms of how that fits in with flash fiction, I would say this idea of give me the same thing, only different is kind of what we're always trying to do in flash fiction. We've talked about, and we have an article on our website about some of the sort of what we call the flash fiction tropes that we see all the time, the same story ideas, the same like kind of plot that we see over and over again, or the same idea. And so when we get that, that's okay. You can write that, but it has to be different. Yeah. It has to be the same thing, only different. And we've talked about that before as like the element of surprise. What are you giving? And it doesn't have to be a twist, but it does have to be something fresh that makes this different from what we've seen every other time before. I do think that's actually, if you want to win a flash fiction competition, super important. Like, what are you bringing that's different here?
Yeah, and I actually think these 10 genres are a great starting point for writing flash fiction. Like if you're looking for ideas and you're thinking like, what the hell do I write about? Which is where we all start when we get the prompts drop. These are 10 ideas basically.
Yeah, and that's your starting point. Yeah. For sure.
So let's move on to the next idea, which is chapter 3, and he calls it, It's About a Guy Who.
It's about a guy who hooks up with a woman 3 times his age.
All right. So this chapter 3, it's about a guy who, and there's 2 concepts raised in this, and one is the importance of character. We've gone through the log line. We've gone through working out where your idea sits in this spectrum of genres that he's called out. Now we need to make it personal. We need to make it about something that people can connect with. So who's your character? Number 1, identify your main character. Even though you've got a cast of characters, come up with a main character. Make sure there's something that people will connect to. And the second concept here is make it primal. And that's something that comes back to a lot in this book, make it primal, which I think of as make it universal, like a universal experience that people can understand. I think this is really important in not just screenwriting, but also flash fiction. Who's your character? And make it primal or universal or otherwise, something that we can understand immediately. Even if it's not a good guy, it could be a good guy or a bad guy or whatever, but it's got to be like we've got to understand and connect with the wants and needs and circumstances of this character in like this primal way. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that does work in a flash fiction format. Obviously, like we talk about character as being very crucial in flash fiction stories, that the character is kind of what makes it or breaks it. It's the voice of your character. It's how closely we can relate to them, how much they feel real to us will really impact how deeply we engage with the story. So I think that's a really important point. He's putting it as like, you've got to be able to sell it this way. It's about a guy who blah, blah, so that you've sold your story in a little neat package. That's not what we're talking about in flash fiction terms. We don't need to be able to pick that out and identify this. It just needs to be, like you say, primal. It needs to have this connectivity to it of, okay, no matter who I am coming to this story, I can connect to that person like they're a human being across time and space, across the fact that they're fictional. They feel real and they feel like relatable or recognizable as a person.
Okay, so very important in flash fiction, this idea of primality, universality, character. And when Blake Snyder talks about being primal, he talks about like these life or death needs of like food, sex, like those are the only 2 I can think of. Survival kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be like literally life or death. Like in Blank Check, it's not really life or death, but it has to feel like life or death in a way.
What Blake Snyder sort of talks about is that the character that you choose has to serve the plot that you've chosen or the story or the log line or whatever it might be, your concept. The character has to serve it. And I think to a certain degree, that's really helpful to think about in flash fiction as well. But I do think you kind of need to flip it a little bit. I think he places too much emphasis maybe on the idea because we're talking sales pitches here. So let's put a little bit more emphasis on starting with the character first. But at the same time, Blank Check would be a very different movie if it was just any kid doing that, right? It has to be a kid whose dad basically doesn't love him because he doesn't have any money. It has to be that kid because that is the kid who's, you know, we're going to really root for to win the day in this movie because we know he's got such a hill to climb. Like if it's just an average kid whose parents aren't really interested, like it's just not going to have the same impact. Matilda has to be Matilda. That's how that serves that story. I do think that's really helpful in flash fiction. Like if you start with an idea, which you can, if you're writing flash fiction, you start with your plot idea. You can just chuck anyone into that idea. And I think sometimes we're working quickly, we have our character and we just start writing and we don't think too deeply about it. But maybe you need to think a bit more deeply about it. Why that person? What's interesting about their backstory that makes them the person to tell this story? I think we get stories too where this isn't even that person's story. They're not like the hero of this story. Like it's this other character's story really. So you've got to think about whose story am I telling and why is this an important story for this character to be telling? If not, can I imbue them with some characteristics that make this more ironic or make this like a bigger battle for this person or make this couple more perfect for each other, for example, in a unique way?
Yeah, and like part of me says that feels contrived, but
it is.
It's also like that, exactly, but that's what makes it compelling. So it's true. You've got to have universal truths in there and you've got to have like this irony and you've got to have these characters and these emotions come through and you've got to construct that. Like it's not going to be off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Like you've actually got to construct it.
And think about it.
Okay, So I think we should move on to chapter 4, which is really like where this book pays for itself, I think, is in the structure. And you said you've used this in your own writing, and I think like it's really illuminating. And he does it from the perspective of like you're writing a screenplay and he'll tell you these are the beats and here is where you need to hit them, page 1 to 5, 10 to 15, whatever. You know, you can use that as a guide. And then say the cat writes a novel, translates that to pages in a novel. And I think it's like you said when you're writing Go Big or Go Home, you get to the middle and you're not like, well, what do I do now? Like, what's the next step? Because I've already set up the characters and now they're off on their little adventure. What do I write about? And this answers that question. This answers that question of like, now we introduce the B story and we kind of develop it. And so I thought it was really, really great. I would just say to anyone who's writing, like, don't just do this. Like, think about it, how it applies to your story and how you can make it your own.
I agree completely. I think I have suffered that problem, honestly. Like, I think I have been a slave to the formula at the expense of what felt natural or realistic or what have you. I think, I think I have worked to make the parts of my story all fit together. But you've expressed frustration with me in the past because I would come to you and I'd be like, I can't see how to get from here to here. And you'd be like, whatever, doesn't matter. And in my head, I'm like, no, but you don't understand. This is this part of the structure and this is that part of the structure and I'm missing a piece in the middle. And, you were right. Like, I know you love to hear that, but it's
Can you
rare.
say it again?
You were so right on this one occasion about like, it doesn't matter. You don't actually need to be a slave to it. What's going to actually flow and work? What do you want to write next? Like, that's like a question I don't ask myself often enough, I don't think. What do I want to write next? What are the characters likely to do next? That might even surprise me instead of, just slaving away trying to tick boxes. Speaking of boxes to tick, what are they? Let's list them out. Yeah.
Well, there's like roughly about 15 beats that fall within this 3-act structure, and we begin with this opening image. And I can picture this very clearly in a movie, like Home Alone, say. Opens with that family dynamic of it's crazy the night before. Like the idea of the opening image is the before snapshot.
Yeah. And I think that is super helpful in any story to think about the opening as being the before, but also the close of the circle that you want to end with, because we come often full circle from the beginning to the ending and back to that beginning again to sort of reflect on what has changed.
So like for flash fiction, it is important because what you're trying to highlight is like the change. Change is part of all fiction and flash fiction it is as well. But I don't know if like you need to be, here is the opening image and here is the closing image. You've got to kind of work it in.
Yeah.
And that's true of a lot of these. And he's outlined these as beats. In flash fiction, I don't think they're really beats.
No. I think there's some shopping list items that you need to have in there. I think a crucial word here is image, right? And we say this often when we're talking about flash fiction. And I have to point out that when we're comparing this stuff to flash fiction, we're talking about a pretty classic story structure. Of course, there are many ways of doing flash, including hermit crab and so on. We're talking about a classic narrative arc. So I guess we're analysing it from that perspective. But the word image is so important because and we've talked about this before, when you drop into a scene in a story, we're going from one to the next. How have you created an image in our mind of where we are, who's here? I think that's super important. I talk about naming the character. That's one way of giving us the information very quickly. But also, what's your setting? Like, give us that opening image very quickly. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of a circle. That's one way of doing things. But it does need to be like who, where, what, like what are they doing? The answers need to be given right up front. And then we can carry on from there.
Yeah. All right. Still in Act 1, theme stated. And we've spoken about this briefly before. And from the perspective of this formula, this process, theme stated is like you're making the theme of the story overt and you're saying like this is what the movie is about in one way or another, not what it's about on a like the macro level of for blank check. It's the kid gets the money. It is, as you said, it is the idea of money letting you make up the rules.
And honestly, I mean, I wouldn't call this a beat in flash fiction. What I think the theme is in flash fiction is your whole story has to be your theme. And that's, my favorite friend, Poe, and Poe's single effect. If you've got to be working to that theme the whole time, you don't just state it and sort of answer that question. Everything needs to be serving that theme including the characters you choose, including the setting that you choose, all of these can feed into that one idea, because in Flash, that's kind of all you have time for. I don't think you necessarily need to state it overtly in the way that Blake Snyder suggests you do. I think it can come from the piece of writing itself. When everything is pointing to that same theme, you don't need to say it because it's self-evident.
Yeah.
It's like theme delivered, right? Like you need to deliver a theme. That needs to be there. That, as you say, it needs to be that one step beyond the plot. It's not just what happens. It's like, why does that happen? And why does that mean something by the end of this story? The change that will happen in this plot. What's the point of that?
Because it's not just a werewolf, it's a wirewolf.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm just going to skip over the next 3 beats in quick succession because I think they're very plot-based beats and they are setup, catalyst, and debate. So basically, what's about to happen, setting that up, what makes it happen, and then it's the character wrestling with like the next step. So I don't necessarily think when we think about flash fiction that needs to apply. Like we talk about change in flash fiction, but it's not in the same way. And I want to come back to this later when we're talking about these other elements of scene structure that Blake Snyder talks about, which I think are more relevant.
A big part of this that's worth pointing out at this point as we're comparing it to flash fiction is that this structure includes multiple pivotal moments. A piece of flash fiction we suggest is usually one pivotal moment.
Yeah.
So we're not expecting every single one of these moments and the turns and twists that happen in a whole movie, for example. So what I would suggest if you're writing a piece of flash fiction is when you think of this setup part, so this is like the first act of your little 3-act scene, that you do need setup, and that's that who and where, kind of those questions, and what. And I think the setup is the what. Like what's probably the conflict, the central conflict, the problem the protagonist has, or perhaps it's a desire that they have that we will see some sort of conclusion to in the end of this story. So you're setting up in that opening what to expect. And I think there is something fundamentally maybe primal or human in that when you're telling a story, you set it up at the start. You sort of seed what the ending is going to be in the beginning somehow so that the ending feels satisfying because it answers the question, the thematic question or the narrative question that you asked in the beginning is answered by the end or subverted maybe. So I think that setup, there's many ways of approaching it, but you can think of it like a question. What is the question that you're going to answer by the end of this 500-word piece or whatever it might be?
So looking at the structure here, we're now into Act 2, and the first beat of Act 2 is called Break into 2, basically meaning like whatever change that you were kind of in conflict about has now happened. You've broken into this new world, and in this 3-act structure, Blake Snyder talks about it as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you're now antithesis in blank check. He's bitten the bullet, he's cashed the check, and now he has all the money, and we're in Act 2.
I think an important point that you kind of skipped there, but one which I think is a salient point for people who read Save the Cat is it's a choice that the protagonist makes.
Yeah.
They say it's like going on a journey, but you're not necessarily literally going on a journey, but it's a pivotal choice that they make. It's almost like I've fought my demons. I have to maybe do this thing, but I'm choosing to do it.
Yeah.
So it's a very active part of the plot.
Yeah.
It's very centered around your main character and their agency and what they're choosing to do in this story. So everything that comes next is a consequence of their choice to do that.
Yeah, that's right. And like that's one thing in a later chapter, Blake Snyder talks about my screenplay isn't working, what could be wrong with it? That's one of the things that he says, look at, like, is your main character the agent that drives this change? Okay, so we're in Act 2 now. Like there's a few beats here. So one is B story. Like you've moved into this new world and now we're adding an extra element. And what he says a lot of the time, like 90% of the time, that's the love story is the B story. But it's not always. Like there's sometimes something else going on. And then fun and games is the next beat. And I mentioned that before. This is like the bit that you pay to see when it comes to a movie. Like in Blank Check, it's the wish fulfillment.
In Goonies, it's all the traps
Yeah.
and the adventure.
Yeah. In Back to the Future Part 2, it's where
He hooks up with
gets
his
to
mum.
ride. No, Part 2 where he rides the skateboard and like he gets the almanac and all that kind of thing. So it is that bit of the movie where all the fun stuff happens.
I mean, in something like The Godfather, it would just be everyone dying, but
So then comes the midpoint, which I thought was a bit vaguely described in Save the Cat. He's saying that sometimes the midpoint can be like a high point from which things go down. Sometimes it can be a low point from which things can improve.
it's the light and shade thing.
Yeah.
So I think it can go either way. I think he does compare it to, there's another moment, is it All Is Lost? I'm trying to think which other moment is kind of the mirror image.
All is lost. So he says if the midpoint is a high point, then all is lost is a low point. The midpoint is a low point, all is lost is a high point, which for me is like, again, the astrology element of it, of being like, well, okay, now you're just kind of shoehorning everything into this little structure.
No, but I think it's
still
true. I think I think it's like the midpoint is pivotal, right? And sometimes it's going to be a negative reason for that. And I think it's opening up that opportunity for that to be a negative experience or a positive experience, as long as it's very pivotal and central to the plot. And another thing that I believe he describes is that the two halves of the story should be mirrors of each other in that way. So if there's positive and negative beats, that you would sort of mirror them. And yes, that does not have to be followed to a T, but there is a certain level of satisfaction in this kind of ebb and flow that you would have in a story. So I think it's probably a good model to consider.
All right. Bad guys close in is the next beat. Fun and games are over. Like the bad guys are now a real threat. For a while, they were kind of distant. And we got that in Blank Check as well. Like he was having fun and the bad guys were there, but they weren't mentioned.
They were separately kind of dealing with
They were looking for him, but it wasn't serious yet. And so we could kind of forget about them for a bit and enjoy the fun and games. But now they're closing in. Next beat is called All Is Lost. It's that moment in a movie where you think that it's all over for the hero, followed by Dark Night of the Soul, where the character has to wrestle with the repercussions of their actions.
So all is lost. Everyone gets kicked out of the party and the party's all over. The Dark Night of the Soul in Blank Check is him wrestling with the idea, well, where are all my friends? I'm actually alone.
Yeah.
People only wanted the money. I did all this because I wanted love and attention and now I've got none. If we talk about theme stated, in this case, there was also the antithesis stated, which is a fool and his gold are soon parted. That's actually explicitly said by the limo driver in this film. And he starts to realise that.
Yeah, and we kind of went through fairly quickly through Act 2, and I'm just kind of now reflecting back onto flash fiction, how much of this applies. And like, I just don't feel it does.
It doesn't, because flash fiction is really centering on those pivotal moments. You can give us fun and games in flash fiction, but unless there's some sort of pivotal moment or compelling reason for all of that, it's just stuff. It's not really a story. And, you know, anyone who's written a novel knows that the middle is the hardest part in that way. Like, it just feels like filler and fluff sometimes, which we have zero time for in flash fiction. So it's not to say you can't have the bad guys closing in as your scene, but it would be that pivotal moment where they do close in.
Yeah.
Not like a whole scene where we're like back and forth and worried about it. It's they're here kind of thing. And one other thing I'd just call out is like this Dark Night of the Soul. That's like maybe what we would think of as some of the very interior stories that we receive, where it's just the character on their own ruminating about their problems and about the world and, oh, woe is me and, you know, I'm just miserable. And that's not a story either to me. That is a moment, that is an idea, but there needs to be something pivotal in that. You can't just like have someone angsting and then just leave it. And they might come to a realization, but what causes that realization? It can't be in them all along. They have to kind of have a reason to go from where they begin to where they end with, again, some pivotal moment in there.
I think in the context of a movie or a novel, like that can be a very powerful moment. And like that's why it's on this list of beats, because it can be an emotionally powerful moment in a way that like the rest of it is not. Like it's a negative, it's an interior moment often that contrasts with the rest of the movie.
Like a quiet beat.
Yeah. But at the same time, it only works because of all the other stuff that's in there that supports it. And if you just write that scene in flash fiction, it's not going to have that emotional energy to back it up.
It's a case of balance, and you just can't afford to have the balance tipped that far, I think, in favour of that rumination without something else to support it or balance against. So I'd issue that as a word of caution. Like if your piece of flash fiction feels like a dark night of the soul moment, then maybe it's not really a whole story, it's a beat.
Yeah. Okay, so Act 3 in this structure is just 3 beats. And I think Blake Snyder acknowledges in the book that that's kind of because it is so open-ended and hard to write. And a climax is different for everyone.
Go on. You missed.
I missed the whole.
Go.
Oh my God.
Okay, third time's a charm.
So like the climax of a story is different for every story, and it's very hard to write, and like you've got to draw together all of these loose threads that you've like laid down throughout the whole story and try to synthesize them into something that actually makes sense. So this is not about a beat necessarily. It's about kind of bringing that all together into its culmination and delivering a satisfying conclusion. So the 3 beats are break into 3. Okay, so we're now into the third act.
And again, that's moving from that antithesis to the synthesis moment.
That's right. So if we think about that in terms of character change, like the antithesis, the Act 2, the character is in this new world, and the synthesis is combining the old world and the new world.
Yeah, he knows what it's like to have money.
Yeah.
He knows what it's like to not have money. And he's realising that neither is the answer to his problem, which is to get love from his dad.
All right. So I want to move on to the next chapter, and it's chapter 5. He calls it Building the Perfect Beast, and he introduces this idea of like the storyboard. You know, taking this 3-act structure, and it's also like a 4-act structure the way he lays it out. There's a 2A and 2B with the midpoint in the middle, and then you put a card for each scene, and you just describe the scene objective on that card, like what happens in that scene. And for each scene, he says like you need to have 2 things. One is emotional change, and the other is conflict. And so I think that is also, for flash fiction, that is even more informative than all of the other.
Yeah,
100%. So we talk about writing a scene. You've got to have emotional change. You've got to have conflict. But then going back earlier in Blake Snyder's process, you've got to have character.
Yep.
And
a bit of setup.
And if we're adapting this process to flash fiction, I think those are the key things. And we read scenes that do not have emotional change. Or do not have conflict. And those are like, they're pretty much deal killers. Yeah. Regardless of the format that you use, you can be writing like Hermit Crab, you can be writing a poem, you can be writing like in some wacky voice, whatever, it doesn't matter.
No, I agree. I mean, again, like it's difficult to say as a blanket rule, but certainly vast majority of stories, any story that is like a classic story or a classic scene should have all those components. And if it lacks any one of those, it's going to kill it.
That is Blake Snyder's process. And like in the remaining chapters, he talks a bit about troubleshooting and some other insights. And I don't necessarily want to go through them all because we've spoken a lot. We've been talking for hours at this stage. But I do want to at least talk about Save the Cat, which is the title of the story. To me is also, and he says it in the book, like this is the most controversial part of the book. And also for me, I think is also like maybe the weakest part of his writing advice generally.
Oh, okay.
Because I think the structural stuff is really good. Like that's the meat and potatoes of the book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, it's a good title for a book, which is probably why and we know now the structure, the beat sheet as Save the Cat. But in fact, the idea, the concept of Save the Cat is this idea that your protagonist should be given a moment very early in their story where they do something like heroic, like save a cat from high up in a tree, very selflessly to set them up as this person that everybody wants to relate to. Yeah. So even if your protagonist is a villain, even if they're a bad guy, you give them this human moment, which the reader should connect with, which should sustain them through this story, thinking, oh, this person's pretty good. I like this person. Is that how you see it?
It is. And like I think when you hear about the Save the Cat moment, one of the things that I think about is, well, your main character is not always likable, right? And you're not always creating a hero.
Yeah, but it's not about creating a hero. It's about redeeming them. It's about having a humanizing moment
Yeah.
that is relatable, that helps us connect beyond whatever else is going on for this character. I mean, they could be too good, but you give them a moment that makes them human, but also good.
Yeah, but like this is where my skeptical nature kicks in and goes, well, hang on, is that what you're doing? I agree. Humanizing your character is what's happening here, and it's important. One of the examples he gives in his book where people have confronted him about this and said, well, hang on, is that what movies do? Like, do all movies have this? And the example he gives is Pulp Fiction, and the save the cat moment in Pulp Fiction is like the conversation on the way to the like place where they're going to shoot the guy is like about trivial shit like burgers and blah, blah, blah. There's no cat saving going on there, right? And these characters they're on their way to murder people, right? So how do you redeem those people and make them human? You have that conversation where they're talking about dumb shit that people might talk about. But I think what happens in Pulp Fiction is that the movie opens with the dumb shit conversation, and that's entertaining and it's kind of fun banter. And the fact that then they go to like turn into these badasses that murder people is shocking, right? And what that movie does is like make you connect with those characters first before they do something shocking. And exactly what he's talking about, like that is the save the cat moment. It's just like you're expanding that definition of the save the cat like pretty widely when you're applying it to Pulp Fiction. So I think like don't get hung up on that phrase, save the cat, and thinking like I've got to make my character a good guy. And I think that's a really important lesson for flash fiction, especially because you should ask yourself the question, why should I care? Like why would the reader care about this character? It's one thing to have a great character, but you need to address the question of why does the reader care? And sometimes the answer to that question is because they're just like me in some way.
Yeah, establishing some level of empathy there. And, you know, you don't always need to work that hard because not every character is going to be that unrelatable.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's going to be quicker and easier, but nevertheless humanizing them, making them feel real too, I think is something that's important in Flash, because if the character just feels like a cardboard cutout and doesn't feel like a real person, it's not going to connect. So that's something to think about too, not just like humanizing them in the point of like what makes them likable, but humanizing them from the perspective of what makes them a person and not just like a word on a page. What makes them leap off the page and become like a whole human.
Okay, there's a couple more chapters and I think they're really great in terms of taking your writing to the next level. Like when you've got a problem, how do you solve the problem? Identifying the problems in your writing. And for me, this is a really great book to have on your bookshelf. Yeah. And if you're writing, if you get stuck, like crack it open and it might give you some insight into where you're going wrong.
It's definitely a writer's block breaker, I think, especially that murky middle side of things. You pull this out and you've got some ideas already of what to work with, some things to play with. And yeah, this is very analytical, right? It's looking at stories that exist and starting to break down like the structure and the parts of them that are successful. So if you need to analyze your own work, this is a great resource for that because it will help you look at, compare and contrast your story to successful stories and to just a general formula for what works as a story structure.
Let's talk briefly about Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Now, I admit I didn't read every word of this. I just kind of flicked through after reading Save the Cat because a lot of it was really just repeating and restating a lot of the concepts but adapting them to a novel. And I think that like you can read Save the Cat and adapt that to a novel yourself, like in your head, just like think about the kind of beats that I outlined.
I created my own spreadsheet and worked it into a classic 3-act structure for a book.
But I think the value add here is that it goes into like the 10 genres that are laid out in the first book and really gets deep into them, applies them to real world examples.
Yeah, well, I would say that my most marked page and the page that I come back to time and again when I'm in, a writing frame of mind, which it's been a while, is page 280 and 281.
The storyboard.
It's a little diagram of the storyboard, which, Blake Snyder talked a lot about, and a lot of people do have their index cards and they map out the story and they move the pieces around on their serial killer, a corkboard kind of thing. But this one is specifically dedicated to novels and it's a little bit different in terms of the balance. Like how much story fits in each section. And I found this incredibly helpful for plotting my novel, incredibly helpful. Now, much like Blake Snyder, you might question my credentials as to whether you would want to copy me. Like if I'm saying, oh, this helped me a lot, that doesn't mean it's going to be useful to other people, because I'm not saying that it necessarily resulted in a good book, but it certainly resulted in a story that was easier for me to write and construct. And this is where I'm talking too about, and I think it was this book more so maybe than Blake Snyder's book, which helps fill in that middle part and like the balance of that middle part. So here it's labelled as Act 2A and Act 2B. So that's actually Act 2.
Yep.
But the suggestion is that should be half your story.
Yeah.
And breaking that down again, we've got fun and games, okay, but now we're breaking it down into how many scenes should that be roughly and how much until the midpoint. And then from there, bad guys close in. How much is bad guys close in? And then, you know, you talked before about how Blake Snyder kind of glossed over that ending a little bit. Act 3 is mapped out into like very detailed bits. And these include gathering the team, executing the plan, high tower surprise, dig deep down, execution of the new plan, and then final image. So this is a really, to me, very helpful way to break down a climactic end of a book into more manageable chunks. So it's not just this one big scene where everything happens. It's actually still a series of smaller beats that build to that climactic moment. And so I used in my book, for example, a high tower surprise, which is the idea of like right at the last minute. And in The Goonies, for example, the high tower surprise is when Chunk and Sloth swing down on the rope, you know, on the pirate ship. Hey, you guys, you know, a very memorable scene. But that is what just pushes them over the edge to win the day. And I think that's a, you know, a compelling moment. And it did help me to, I guess, fill in the blanks there with that climax. So I refer to that section of the book a lot and would refer back to the chapters that relate to each of those to sort of flesh those out if I was in a plotting stage where I wanted to kind of figure out where my story was going. So yeah, I definitely think Save the Cat Writes a Novel is super helpful if you're writing a novel rather than a screenplay. It does break it down slightly differently in a way that balances it a little bit better in a novel format as compared to a screenplay format.
Okay. Like, I think we've covered it all. There's definitely more that we could talk about, but...
We could talk about it all day long.
So my view on this, if you want to just kind of tie a big bow around it, is I'm going to go back to a Reddit comment, and this is by original name 317, that says, "We want both surprises and norms. Not enough of either leaves us unsatisfied. To me, the art is in how a writer plays with that equalizer between the two extremes. We ask ourselves what expected things are going to make an audience resonate with this story and what unexpected things will make them think about this story tomorrow. When we pull that off, we give the audience two kinds of happy." And I think that's a really good summary here. And what these books give you is the expected. And we, talk about the language of novels or the language of movies. There's certain expectations that people have about movies and stories. And Save the Cat really tells you how to deliver those. But a big part of it, as we talked about with Blank Check, is that, you can be too predictable and you can fail to deliver the art side of it. In Save the Cat as well, Blake Snyder talks about like American versus European movies. And he says, like, this is very much a guide to American movies, which I think is true as well. Like, if you've ever watched European movies, they don't follow anything like this kind of. So
there's a lot more just wandering around in a European movie.
Yeah. So it's the expectation that you get from this kind of format. And I think, like, understanding that expectation and being able to deliver at least some of that expectation is really important. But it's equally important to find your own voice and to find like the thing that really resonates and, like this poster said 7 years ago, like surprises you.
We talk about art and craft, right? But it's a battle between the brain and the heart. I feel like in my case, you know me, I'm over analytical at times. I've got a lot of heart when it comes to my writing. I want to put myself out there. I have no hesitation to put myself out there. But I do have a tendency to overthink, overanalyze to the point where the story just starts to become like Frankenstein's monster or whatever. Like it's just all these parts and bits and it doesn't have this flow to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge for me. I'm sure that challenge is shared by plenty of our listeners of how do I take all these things that I'm learning and just do it naturally. And I
Yeah.
guess I'm somewhere in between that conscious incompetence and conscious competence stage. I think I've got a bit of both. I'm in the middle there. And what I want to move to is that unconscious competence where it just comes naturally and I'm not having to overanalyze. The story tells itself. You feel it, you sense it, and you don't need to force it.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. And I think these books are great for people who are in that learning stage to become part of your craft, to become part of what hopefully will eventually come more naturally, but for now maybe feels a bit clunky. I wish my learning journey was a lot shorter than it is. It's been a long learning journey. I'd love to get to that unconscious competence stage, but I'm not there yet.
And like, look, we talk about writing as if it's one thing, but there are people who are natural writers who have a great grasp of like tense and syntax and all that kind of thing. And maybe some people are great at voice and some people are natural storytellers.
Yes.
And what this is like how to be a storyteller. And I wish I was a natural storyteller because some people have that ability. Like you watch George R.R. Martin just talking and constructing stories as he speaks, basically.
Okay.
And I've never been able to do that.
No.
And so I've got to take that analytical approach to it to work out like top down what other people are doing naturally. But I know there are also people who struggle with things that I find simple, like syntax.
That's true.
So everyone has their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And writing is like, it is the synthesis of all these skills. So now it's my turn to recommend you something. And I've got to say, I've got a little bit of PTSD.
Oh, no. I know. I did apologise and then very, very quickly insulted you again. So I'm sorry again for what I said before when I was apologising.
You just can't help yourself.
I can't. I've got ODD or something. There's a little something in there.
It's oppositional defiance. If someone tells you like this, you're like, no.
What you said then is wrong, actually. But I don't know how to tell you without proving your point. What do you want from me, man?
I don't know.
This is called Get Wrecked. It's not called.
It is true. That is
it's not
true.
called
We did
Please
call it
Have
Get
a
Wrecked.
Lovely Time.
Yeah.
So hit me. What is it?
Okay. So we were talking, we were messaging the other day and I was like, oh shit, I've got to recommend you something and I actually can't think of anything. But then I did watch something that I would like to talk about and I'm recommending this to you because my wife Sharon fell asleep during it. And so like I've got no one to talk about.
Great.
I don't know if you've seen it.
Glowing review so far.
Have you seen the TV show Adolescence?
No, I haven't.
Okay, good. Have you heard about it?
No, nothing.
Oh, really?
I'm a blank check.
So Adolescence is a British TV show. It just came out a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago or whatever it is at the time of recording. And there's a lot of angles here, right?
Okay.
One is the story. And there's a lot of interesting social commentary in there, which we can talk about. And there's also like just the production of it is of a very high quality. So there's only 4 episodes.
Okay, that's tick. Green.
4 episodes, but there are hour-long episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something that you have to pay attention to because I know you like to second screen everything.
A little bit.
And like we talk about Garth Marenghi and you're like, guns? Were there guns in this show? Even though half the time they're literally firing off guns.
I don't know what I was thinking. It was very hot. I don't want to bring it up again, but like my brain was melting.
So I would suggest watching this like with your full attention.
Is it like 4 episodes so far? Is it currently coming out? Okay.
No season 2. It's a self-contained story and each episode is very different. But
Is it a comedy? What are we talking?
It's definitely not a comedy.
Okay. Oh dear, of course not.
It's going to be harrowing.
Oh, God.
And it's going to be emotional.
I tell you who really has a problem with this is Andy.
Yeah.
Because he's like, what are you doing? You keep bringing me these like horrible
Well,
things.
then last time I brought you a pretty damn stupid, lighthearted thing and you were like, eh. So this is your punishment.
Okay. I'm
4
going to like
episodes.
it just to piss you off.
The premise, okay, just to set it up, because, content warning, it is about a young girl who gets murdered.
Okay.
But it's not a mystery. So you know who's done it. And it's more about exploring what happens in the community, like why it happened and the effects on the people around them. So the production is amazing. Each episode is shot in a single shot. So 1 hour, single shot, some of them very complex, no cuts in all 4 episodes.
What?
And some of them they got like on the 14th take. And they go through the city. It's like production alone, I would say this is amazing. Acting is spectacular. And the subject. And I'd like to explore the themes, how they're handled from a writing perspective, and also the social commentary angle as well as the production. So I think it's great viewing. Obviously, it's
If you're
confronting
awake. If
viewing.
you're awake for it, it's good viewing.
Oh, look, Sharon has problems staying awake through a lot of TV shows and movies that we watch, but that's just because she works very hard. Anyway, watch it and we'll talk about it.
All right. Looking forward to it.
So as this episode comes out, it should be just before the April round of the competition. Hopefully, if I can get my shit together for editing.
Mm-hmm.
So probably the last regular episode for a little while until we get through reading your stories and long list and short list and daredevils and all that kind of thing, which we can't wait to do. Really looking forward to April. It should be a big round. Should be a fun round.
Fun prompt, I feel. Fun anti-prompt.
Yes. Our lips are sealed. And a really fun image. We just got the image back from our artist in residence, Cam, and it's amazing.
Very exciting.
And we've also got Words on the Waves coming up as well at the end of May, beginning of June. So just a reminder, if you are in the area, check that out. And if you see us there, definitely say hi, because we are constantly amazed that people are listening to us talk shit for hours. And we love it when you come up to us and tell us.
We'd love to talk shit with you in the meat space.
You said it, not me. And look, just one more thing. We never mention this, and we probably should mention it more. But if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy listening to us talk shit, and you have a few minutes, if you're in front of a computer and not driving a heavy vehicle or anything like that, we would love it if you would leave us a rating, like a 5-star rating, obviously.
Ideally.
Or a review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. It really helps us get visibility and traction and grow. That would be amazing.
And we really would love to grow. We want to see this Not Quite Right, the podcast and the comp just reach everyone in the world that is on our wavelength, basically.
We would like to see it blossom like a beautiful flower.
Well, now we're going to get 1-star reviews.
Okay. And without further ado, that about wraps it up. And right on.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to Not Quite Right. If you'd like to reach us via email or follow us on social media, you can find all the links on our website, notquiterightpodcast.com. That's WRITE. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting app.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
I told you I was feeling fragile today, and it's just my little friend.
You need to get a cat.
No,
Cat
fuck
doesn't.
cats. Where's my save the cat moment?
To fuck the cat moment.
Fuck the cat moment. Oh dear. Oh dear.